The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not. But fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin and prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe, end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. I am back from Costa Rica. That's Louise and I went down there on Friday morning and got there Friday afternoon into San Jose, the capital city we flew into, and then drove about 2.5 hours to Finca Nuevo Luna, as I recall, the New Moon Farm, which is owned by two guys, Tom Newmark, who helped found the Carbon Underground with Earl Katz. Earl was there with his wife, Marge, and a fellow named Steve. I'm sorry, I don't remember Stephen's last name, but he was kind of the original owner, actually, of the farm. Had started it as a ginger plantation, and now it is this extraordinary program demonstrating how to use soil to resequester carbon. We're filming a documentary. I'll be telling you about that later on as things go on. But so we were there with a camera crew and a drone and take one, take two, take all this stuff. Walking through the jungle and stuff. But did you know that about a quarter of all the carbon in our atmosphere that shouldn't be there is there as a result of agricultural practices around the world? We have gone from having 10, 15, 20 feet of topsoil in the United States and, in what used to be the Great Plains to having like 6 inches of topsoil. Our agricultural practices, which we've exported all around the world, this really pretty much just in the last 100 years or so, these agricultural practices of monoculture, single, giant fields with a single plant in it, which is not how nature does it. And, tilling the soil, breaking the soil with plows. And this is the stuff that Cain did, right? That got God so angry in Genesis, by the way. He was a tiller of the soil, right? And fighting our competitors rather than cooperating with them. And I want to get to that in just a second. But through the use of herbicides, killing off plants that compete with our food plants, and pesticides, killing off insects that might want to eat part of our food plants. These things are destroying the soil of the planet. And there are some estimates from some pretty solid organizations, that we might have 60 years worth of topsoil left. I mean, literally 60 years of the ability to produce food worldwide. Now, clearly it varies from place to place, but they're just doing amazing work down there. You know, that we wanted to get into this movie. So, so we went down, and the second day, while I was filming, Louise and Earl and Marge and a few other people took a river raft down one of the rivers in Costa Rica and saw these, you know, monkeys and things and all kinds of cool stuff. Louise, I think, was most impressed. She told me twice now about this long line of ants that she saw, little tiny ants carrying great big leaves, like, you know, through the like just this army of, or this long line, you know, this caravan of ants carrying leaves back to, you know, presumably their home or their nest. It takes me back to a piece that was published on February 6th in Alternet. It's titled, "Is Costa Rica the World's Happiest, Greenest Country?" And I would say, sure seems so. It sure seems so to me. Pardon me. I all this airplane travel here recently, I've got something in my lungs. But one of the things that was really interesting, the fellow who picked us up at the airport and drove us out to the farm, out to the finca, was just, you know, a local guy who speaks okay English, who works for a company that you know, is like a cab company and vans for tourists and things like that. And here in the United States, that would be, you know, a low paid or a minimum wage job with no benefits and you know, a lot of turnover and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, we started talking to him and asking him, you know, what's life like in Costa Rica? And he's like, you know, we love it here. He said, you know, we gave up our army. Now, this was in 1949. They eliminated their army and instead moved that money into health and education. And by 2016, 8% of Costa Rica's budget is education. Compare that with El Salvador at 3%, the U.S. at a little over 5%, Colombia around 4.5%, 8%. And so he said, you know, what about your kids? Can they go to school? He says, yeah, they can go to any school. It's free, all the way through college. I said, what about health care? And he said, every month my employer deducts $20 from my paycheck, and then he matches that with $20, and that gives me full health care. And Louise was like, you can go to any doctor, any hospital. He said, well, you know, we're encouraged to stay within the county, the area where we are, but if I'm anywhere in the country, I'm covered. And it's complete, it's comprehensive. Now, I don't know much beyond that about it, and I'm not here to represent myself as an expert on Costa Rica or Costa Rica's healthcare system or education system. But you might find this piece by Ariana Lopez Pena in Alternet from February 6, 2017. Is Costa Rica the world's happiest, greenest country? Fascinating. It just starts out, Costa Rica was the most environmentally advanced and happiest place on earth last year. That was the conclusion of the World Economic Forum's Happy Planet Index, which releases 2016 rating of where in the world people are using ecological resources most efficiently to live long, happy lives. Neither the U.S. nor any European nation make the top 10. But Costa Rica was number one in 2016 and also in 2009 and 2012, this Happy Planet Index. And they note in 1949, Costa Rica took a big gamble eliminating its army and investing those military funds into health and education. And in the 1990s, the country passed a series of green culture laws, included the tax-funded National Forests Law that protects forests, waters, biodiversity, and natural beauty as both tourist attractions and scientific resources. It also developed a financing system supported by both the government and by international organizations such as the World Bank to pay for environmental protection programs. Other green initiatives in Costa Rica include the Eco Marchamo, which is a voluntary complementary tax that allows drivers to offset 100% of the emissions generated by fuel consumption for a year, and the carbon neutral framework that incentivizes good environmental practices by Costa Rican companies. So anyhow, it was a fascinating trip, and it's a beautiful country. And if you are ever inclined to visit some part of Central Central America. It's Panama to the south, Guatemala to the north, and Costa Rica right there in the middle. You got the Atlantic, the Pacific on either side. We were in the up in the rainforest, up there in the top. Meanwhile, here in the United States, now this is an article from this is from a week or so ago. I set this aside to talk about on the air, and I hadn't gotten to it yet. So it said today is the 71st day of the year. I think this must be a couple of weeks ago. At that point in 2017, over 700 children had been shot in the United States. Age 0 to 11, 108, and 577 teenagers aged 12 to 17, either injured or killed by a gun. Altogether, there have been 11,250 gun incidents across the country. And this was just as of, the 3rd, this was January, February, it must have been, March last month. So that's going on. And President Trump today voting in Georgia, and Donald Trump has a message for all of us. It's really weird because I told you many times I'm on his mailing list, on his donor list, and so I get this because I sent him $5 a year and a half ago, and so I get this email today, and it says, Thomas, I recorded a message for you on the high stakes race in Georgia happening right now. Listen to my message here, and you can click on it, and here's what you'll get.
Hello, this is President Donald Trump. Liberal Democrats from outside of Georgia are spending millions and millions of dollars trying to take your Republican congressional seat away from you. Don't let them do it. Only you can stop the super liberal Democrats.
The liberal Democrats are trying to win Georgia. Oh, my God. Please send us money. And as far as I can tell, you're sending money to the Donald Trump campaign. But our Georgia Grassroots Victory Fund to help turn out Republican voters. Well, Trump is sending this out to millions of people. So you might, if you're on Facebook or Twitter or any social media, whatever, friends, neighbors, email. If you know anybody in Georgia, or at least in Newt's old district, where Louise and I used to live. We used to live in Marietta. Newt Gingrich, we used to be my congressman back in the 80s. It was a weird time. And I've told stories about that before. But if you know somebody down there, today is the day. And John Ossoff, I'm not sure. Ossoff, I guess is how OSOFF is the Democrat, and he's got to hit 50% in order to win this race. Because it's a bunch of people in the race, and if he doesn't hit it, then there's a runoff. And once there's a runoff, it'll be him and one other person, a Republican presumably. And at that point, then the big money will probably. Although they've already, there's all kinds of outside spending coming in. So there's a lot going on. I've got a lot of other news here I want to share with you, some science news. If there's anything on your mind, anything you'd like to discuss, we'll just kind of make it an anything goes day/week. This weekend is the March for Science coming up. Janine Benyus, the brilliant scientist who talks about biomimicry, was in Costa Rica with us being filmed for this film. I want to tell you about that. Just a lot coming up, so stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more news, my thoughts, and your calls after. And welcome back. One of our YouTube chatters, Sue tells me, Gene is a dual citizen of Costa Rica and lives there. So, I'll have to get you that link, Sue. It's an email, so I'll forward it to you. But let's see here. Telephone calls. Jesse, watching Free Speech TV in Miami, Florida. Hey, Jesse, how are you today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Costa Rica sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it was.
Hey, but welcome back to the real world.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a question about boom and bust capitalist cycles.
Mm-hmm.
Those saying, you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results,
Yeah, Einstein's definition of insanity. Yeah.
So we've been going through this boom and bust stuff for the longest, and, and look where we are. So what does that say?
Well, what it says, I think, Jesse, is that the booms make a lot of money for the billionaire class, and the busts make a lot of money for the billionaire class. The busts, the major burden of economic downturns is borne by people in the bottom 80, 90%, and particularly by people in the bottom 50%. And because the people at the very top, the very wealthy, very rarely do they get hit by these downturns. They anticipate them. They've got their portfolios hedged, and in most cases, they actually profit from them. Some of the great fortunes in America were made during the Great Depression in the 1930s, for example. So boom and bust capitalism is something that the people in charge of capitalism are very happy with.
Yeah, but that's the thing. You get these guys, Trump promising the world and everything, and we should know it's a lie, because if it works for them and it don't work for us, and we keep expecting it to work for us, we must be crazy.
Yeah, well, we're not. Yeah. by Einstein's definition, yes, as you point out. But in addition to that, there's this whole, all this pushback against people who are trying to either regulate capitalism to make it safer and make the booms less boomy and the busts less busty. Terrible words, sorry, but you know what I mean. To even out those cycles. That kind of regulation is exactly what the Republicans right now are destroying. And, because the rich want to get richer and they want the poor, and they do that by making the poor poorer. And then they also have their whole propaganda system. I mean, you've got the Fox propaganda channel that all day long is telling all these poor suckers who are watching Fox that if they vote in ways that are beneficial to the billionaire class, that will be good somehow for them. And, of course, it doesn't work that way, but they think it does. So... that's what we're up against, Jesse.
What they say, either believe your eyes or believe what you hear. I think most people believe their eyes now. Yeah, except for those people who are watching Fox. Well, the people watching Fox News believe their eyes, but they're seeing a completely different America than the rest of us are seeing. They're seeing an America that it's. I don't even know how to define it, how to describe it. It's kind of 1950s America, it's which was not a friendly time for a lot of people in this country. So anyhow, Jesse, thanks for the call. Excellent point. Your analysis of capitalism is always so spot on. Great to hear from you. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And hopefully there are a lot of Republicans, Sue notes in our chat room in the Georgia race. Hopefully they'll split the right-wing vote. We'll see where this all goes. We will see where all this goes. So I've also been flying a lot. And I think I mentioned this last week, but don't recall if I actually read you the story or shared with you the story. This is a Science World Report. And I have been noticing that, the airplane rides are getting bumpier and bumpier and bumpier. Did I talk about this on the air last week? I think just a little bit, okay.
This is the Science World Report headline. Climate change will lead to severe turbulence and bumpier rides on aircraft. According to research from the UK's University of Reading, severe turbulence will go up by 149%. Moderate turbulence will see a 94% increase, and light turbulence will increase by 59%. This was a study published in the journal Advances in Atmospheric Sciences. And they're looking at clear air turbulence at 39,000 feet. And it's even the most seasoned frequent flyers may be alarmed at the prospect of a 149% increase in severe turbulence, which frequently hospitalizes flight attendants and air travelers around the world. And yep, it's happening. It's happening right now. And I can tell you, I have literally millions of miles, not like in the bank, but I've flown millions of miles on commercial airlines over the years. And it maybe it's subjective, maybe it's just I'm noticing it more, but it just seems, a whole lot crazier than it used to be. So, anyhow, Alan in Kirkland, Washington. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Well, you brought up the story about Costa Rica giving up their army, and as a small student of economics, there's both micro and macro, and everybody seems to know the supply and demand from day one of microeconomics, but day one of macroeconomics, they talk about guns versus butter. Mm-hmm. Government can either spend money on military or on welfare for their population. So right. North Korea is a perfect example of a government that only spends money on guns. Something like Sweden or Denmark might be more towards, or Costa Rica, more towards butter. Yeah. But I don't hear the Democrats framing it this way. We got our president saying that our military is decimated when it's outclasses every other military in the world by far. We have 11 aircraft carrier groups, for God's sake.
Right, and China and Russia each have one.
Right.
China's building number 2 right now.
Destroyers, aircraft carriers, hospital ships. It isn't just one ship. It's a whole fleet, an armada. We can decimate any country in the world 10 times over. We don't need more guns, but we desperately need more butter.
Yeah. That phrase, guns versus butter, I remember during the Vietnam War, there was, because, Lyndon Johnson was selling the Great Society, and which he did very successfully, and cut poverty in the United States by half over the next decade. I mean, it was just a massive, successful program. And at the same time, we had the Vietnam War. And he was basically saying we can have guns and butter. And I think history demonstrates that was, an unreasonable assertion. But the military-industrial complex that Dwight Eisenhower warned us against has taken over. And I frankly don't think that Donald Trump wants to put more money into our military. I think he wants to put more money into our military contractors, into the for-profit part of our military. And that seems clearly where all the money is going. And why do that? Well, because those people make huge contributions to politicians, particularly Republicans. So, Alan, excellent point. Excellent point. Thanks so much for the call. Thanks for listening to KBCS. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 98, the subchapter, The Supreme Court Takes Over. As Charles and Mary Beard, they were famous historians in the 1930s, wrote in The Rise of American Civilization, which is their famous historical record of the United States, quote, "But the states had to reckon with the Federalist interpretation of the Constitution by John Marshall, who, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1801 to 1835, never failed to exalt the pro-business doctrines of Hamilton above the claims of the states." Marshall, appointed to the court by Federalist John Adams, who had appointed for life only Federalists to all federal judgeships, was what today would be called a judicial activist. As the Beards wrote, quote, by historic irony, he, Marshall, administered the oath of office to his bitterest enemy, Thomas Jefferson. And for a quarter of a century after the author of the Declaration of Independence retired to private life, the stern Chief Justice continued to announce old Federalist rulings from the Supreme Bench. In 1803, during the second year of Jefferson's presidency, Marshall took on a power for himself and future Supreme Courts that made President Jefferson apoplectic. In the Marbury v. Madison case, as the Beards related, quote, Marshall had been in his high post only 2 years when he laid down for the first time, in the name of the entire court, the doctrine that the judges have the power to declare an act of Congress null and void when, in their opinion, it violates the Constitution. This power was not expressly conferred on the court by the Constitution. Although many able men have held that the judicial branch of government enjoyed it, the principle was not positively established until 1803 by Marshall's ruling in this case. End of quote. Jefferson, shocked, bluntly expressed his concern to his old friend Judge Spencer Roane, the son-in-law of Patrick Henry and a justice on the Virginia Supreme Court. If this opinion be sound, Jefferson wrote, then indeed is our Constitution a complete felo de se, legally a suicide. For intending to establish 3 departments, coordinate and independent, that they might each check and balance one another. This decision has given, according to this opinion, to one of them alone the right to prescribe rules for the government of the others, and to that one too which is unelected by and independent of the nation. Jefferson continued in full fury. The Constitution, on this hypothesis, is a mere thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary, which they may twist and shape into any form they please. It should be remembered as an axiom of eternal truth in politics that whatever power in any government is independent is absolute also. In theory only at first, while the spirit of the people is up, but in practice, as fast as that relaxes. Independence can be trusted nowhere but with the people in mass. They are inherently independent of all but moral law. My construction of the Constitution is very different from that you quote. It is that each department is truly independent of the others and has an equal right to decide for itself what is the meaning of the Constitution in the cases submitted to its action, and especially where it is to act ultimately and without appeal. A judiciary independent of a king or executive alone is a good thing, but independent of the will of the nation is a solecism, a blunder, at least in a Republican government. In his decision putting the Supreme Court above the elected officials, the legislature and the president, John Marshall was echoing Hamilton's Federalist mistrust of any form of government constrained solely by those elected by the people. Kings had faced challenges, the Federalists argued, and fought back because as kings they could force decisions without having to wait for a consensus of the people. This powerful federal judiciary, only partially answerable to the people, the Federalists believed, was essential to the survival of the nation. As Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers in number 23 about whether there should be constraints in the Constitution that would prevent the U.S. government from operating outside the will of its people, quote, these constitutional powers ought to exist without limitation because it is impossible to foresee or define the extent and variety of national exigencies or the correspondent extent and variety of the means by which may be necessary to satisfy them. The circumstances that endanger the safety of nations are infinite, and for this reason no constitutional shackles can wisely be imposed on the power to which the care of it is committed. Hamilton's argument is essentially what was said by the Bush administration lawyers who argued in their legal briefs for massive increases in presidential powers post 9/11. Madison, as an ally of Jefferson, rebutted Hamilton's worldview, perhaps most eloquently in the Federalist Papers number 39, when he wrote, it is essential to such a government that it be derived from the great body of society, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. Otherwise, a handful of tyrannical nobles exercising their oppressions by a delegation of their powers might aspire to the rank of Republicans and claim for their government the honorable title of Republic. Jefferson further elaborated his arguments for 3 independent and equal in power branches of government, as well in numerous writings during the 1780s as the Constitution was being formed. But that was then, and this was 1803. The deed was done by Marshall, and the Federalists had won. That said, there is no doubt that Marshall, like Hamilton, believed he was doing the best thing for the nation that he had served as a soldier during the Revolutionary War. In the 1819 McCullough versus Maryland decision, for example, he referenced government deriving all its power from and by the people. Anyway, the book is Unequal Protection.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Okay, welcome back. Let's see if we can try this important message from yes, no, maybe. We're not going to try it right now. Okay, we will come back to that. We shall return to that. A couple of other stories that I wanted to share with you that I think are really cool. This governor of Alabama who has resigned to avoid impeachment and to avoid going to prison around his Governor Bentley, around his affair. It turns out that in investigating him, they came up with this other thing. This is from Talking Points memo. This is actually from April 11th. TPM, Alabama LovGov's impeachment probe reveals political motivation behind DMV closures. Given that, today is the special election day in Georgia. The report released Friday shed light on another controversy that dogged his tenure. This, of course, not Georgia. This is Alabama, and this is, Governor Robert Bentley. His administration's decision to close 31 driver's license offices, many in African-American heavy counties, promoting a national outcry over how the closures would affect voting rights in the state, which requires a voter ID to vote, a photo ID. And so it turns out that this proposed closing multiple driver's offices throughout the state and asked them to put together a plan to roll out in a way that would have limited political impact on Governor Bentley's political allies. That's a quote from the report. This is pretty amazing. This guy was actually shutting down driver's license bureaus, not because he didn't want people to get driver's licenses to drive, because he didn't want people to get driver's licenses to vote. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Rich in Cedro-Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today? Rich? Okay, I'm going to put Rich on hold. He's on line 3. You can check him out, Nate. Gino in Blue Island, Illinois. Hey, Gino, can you hear me?
Yep, how's it going?
Great. So what's up?
Not so much. I'm a student. I'm actually an agricultural education student, and when I heard you bring up the Costa Rica and what sort of damage really agriculture is doing to the environment, I just really thought it'd be cool to call and point out that really the biggest impact on the environment from agriculture is the cattle industry.
Yeah.
Because especially within the United States, it's one of the most ridiculous. The impact is, even if we just switched from feeding them grain and corn to actually like regular forages and grass, that would even have a huge impact on improving the environment.
Well, that's one of the things that they're doing at Finca Nuevo Luna or whatever, I think that's the name, this farm, this New Moon farm in Costa Rica, is they've got a pasture, which is unusual in a rainforest. So, but it was there when they acquired it. It used to be this ginger plantation. And they've got a pasture, and literally every day, they've got about 8 cows. And every day they move them from one little paddock to the next. It's just all organized with electric wires. And so that they don't wipe out graze the grass down to its roots or damage it, but that they're demonstrating that, number one, these cows are not producing methane, unlike those in the feedlots that are fed grains. Number two, they're actually recycling, nitrogen and carbon through the soil and causing the roots of the plants to go deeper and deeper, which builds soil. And we used to have this incredible relationship between ruminants, principally bison, and the Great Plains in the United States, and it produced, in some cases, as much. Illinois. Tom Newmark was telling me the day before yesterday. Illinois used to be. There were places where the soil was literally 100 feet deep. it was considered, the Great Plains, the great breadbasket, and now not so much. But anyhow, back to you, Gino.
Yeah, even in other countries, like Ireland, for example, was the first country since the 1990s which is allowed to actually import beef to the United States. Almost all the cattle from Ireland is 100% grass fed, and not only does it help the environment, it also tastes a bit better, to be honest.
Yeah. There you go. I don't eat beef, but I've been told that, yes. And so it's all about ag practices. I mean, factory farming is killing the world. And by the way, it's killing us too. It's producing, a lower quality food. I mean, here we're taking these cows and we're shooting them up with hormones that cause them to become basically obese for a cow. And we're feeding them a food type, the grains, which they did not evolve to eat, which is causing them to be essentially cow obese. And then we wonder why we have an obesity epidemic in the United States. There has to be a relationship there. Not to mention, I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, cow farts are causing, methane and polluting the. Well, yeah, if you're doing these giant, giant industrial ag things, spot on. Gino, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Dave in Radcliffe, Kentucky. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom. First of all, I just wanted to say I'm glad you mentioned wastewater because, that was one of Trump's first things was to exempt farmers from the WOTUS, the Waters of the United States Rural.
Right.
And, it got some attention, but, I just don't think it got nearly enough because wastewater is one of the biggest contaminants globally, certainly. And then from agriculture. And also, I wanted to mention this North Korea missile test. When I worked in the government for years, there's this theory that, even though North Korean rhetoric sounds very bellicose and really, frankly, a little bit absurd to Americans, there's a reason behind it. All right, there's this, like I said, it's a theory that it's really very, very adept, very, very, smart what they're doing, very calculated. I never bought off on it, okay? But there is one interesting thing. Now, they do have a missile testing problem, right? Mm. And they have a missile problem perfecting its capabilities. And ever since, Trump did this interaction with North Korea, they've decided to up their missile testing to once a week. Now, I think they're probably going to get by with that. And it might be to work out some sort of problem with their missile development program. But I don't know. I never really bought off on it. I'll be honest with you. But I never bought off on that it was some really ingenious propaganda technique.
So your point is that we shouldn't be as worried about North Korea as we appear to be?
No, my point is now they're going to increase their missile testing once a week. The frequency is higher.
Right.
And I doubt Trump will get any political capital off of revisiting this.
Oh, I see.
So really, if they may have masterminded, they may have found a way to increase the frequency of missile testing to, iron out any problems they have in development.
Yeah, I'm wondering, if the Stuxnet virus, if we have succeeded in hacking their systems, if we blew up their missile, on the day of the sun, the day of the 150th anniversary of Kim Jong-un's grandfather's birth, if we had something to do with that, or if they think we had something to do with that. But the rhetoric that is pushing us toward war does concern me tremendously, Dave. And it's not just Kim Jong-un's rhetoric. I mean, this started with George W. Bush declaring them part of an axis of evil. And then he took out one of those three countries, Iraq, and Iran immediately started developing a nuclear weapon, and so did North Korea, in response to what our last, idiot Republican president had to say. Now we've got another Republican president who's making equally bellicose statements, and I suspect that Kim thinks that he's doing this like in self-defense. So we'll see where this goes. But anyhow, we'll be right back. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. I am concerned about North Korea and Donald Trump's inexperience, his bellicosity, his belief. He's a bully. Like, this guy has spent his life being a bully, refusing to pay people who work for him and then threatening them with lawsuits and stuff like that. I mean, maybe you can get away with that when you're a small-time developer in New York City, but not when you're the president of the United States.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is, quite literally no way to run a country. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Carla in Posey, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Carla, what's on your mind?
Hi. Thank you, Tom, for taking my call. I got a bad cold, so I hope you can understand me.
I hear you fine.
You were talking about Costa Rica and the loss of topsoil due to agricultural practices and what have you. Where does this topsoil go?
Mostly into the oceans. It goes into rivers first, and then the rivers eventually go into the oceans.
So is there a potential for business opportunity finding a way of retrieving that topsoil in the rivers before it makes it to the ocean? Would that be feasible or reasonable?
Yes and no. There's a difference between soil and dirt. And these are not scientific terms, but just kind of generally speaking, soil has little tiny crushed up rocks and lots and lots and lots of organic matter. Soil is a battery for carbon. It's a sink. It holds carbon. It's also a battery for water. And so having, several feet of healthy topsoil filled with organic matter, filled with hundreds of trillions of fungi and bacteria and viruses and little tiny, plants and animals and things, all of that's like really important stuff. When it gets washed, when we kill it through tillage and through herbicides and pesticides, and then it blows off or runs off as a result of erosion into our rivers, it ceases to be soil and it simply becomes dirt or sand or silt. And so taking that silt out of the Mississippi River and dumping it back on the farms in Illinois where it came from is only going to just basically, it's like putting sand on top of your dirt, on top of your soil. And without regenerative agriculture practices, you just can't do that. So I don't think that there's a business opportunity there. The cool thing that I learned when I was in Costa Rica is, I knew that trees produce soil, produce dirt, basically. That the deeper roots go down and they bust up rock, and in the process of busting up the rock, that becomes dirt. The three main ways that dirt is produced are one by weatherization. The winds blowing across the Himalayas, wearing away the rock, and that going into the rivers and then downstream or in the air currents and downwind and becoming soil. Number one, but number two is trees. But number three, the one I didn't know that much about, I'd heard about, but Tom was demonstrating it for me in Costa Rica. I mean, this is a demonstration farm. This thing there, it's a giant experimental ag station. Was that grasses will produce soil, and they do it, and in fact, as the cows just chew a little bit off the top of the grass, it causes the grass to send their roots deeper, like in response, and like as a safety measure. Hey, we need more biomass here because some of our biomass just got chewed by a cow, and so they send their deep roots deeper, and when they hit rock, they start breaking it up. And so grass makes soil, which is how the Great Plains became so fertile. And the ruminants, the bison, in this case cattle, interacting with that soil, keeping it rich and full of carbon and moisture, provide a positive feedback loop, a positive feedback loop that builds more and more soil. So basically, we're at the situation now where we've got to actually build soil through agricultural practices rather than, dump trucks and things like that. But it's a good thought, Carl. I get how you're thinking this, and I love the entrepreneurial spirit of your thought. I'm not sure it's practical. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Rich in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, want to try it again?
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's quite all right.
I also think of Nepal as a very impoverished country in the Himalayas. It wasn't a rich, self-sustaining agricultural program or aspect to it. And most of the topsoil there in the valleys and the little pockets in the mountains there were held in place by hemp, and which supplied food, shelter, clothing, medicine, entertainment.
Did you just say hemp, like with an H?
Hemp, yes, hemp with an H, or cannabis.
Okay.
And what happened was when the Americans and the Russians were dividing up the world, we got Nepal, but we said, you're not going to get aid from us unless you get rid of all that drug there, that cannabis drug.
Right.
And so when the cannabis went away, when the hemp went away, so did the topsoil and their agriculture, and they've since then just become dependent upon the rest of the world for their food supply.
Oh, my. I did not know that story. It's remarkable.
You can find that in Harrer's The Emperor Wears No Clothes.
Okay.
And everybody should
Rich,
copy of that to their senator.
Yeah, cool. Rich, thanks for the information. I'm telling you, I learned so much doing this show. I'm so grateful to you all. Gary in Willow Creek, California. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today? Gary?
Yeah,
hello?
Yeah. Hi. Hey, I was just going to take it. Man, I got a cold too. But anyway,
are we in a free speech
you
TV
were
break?
talking about Costa Rica earlier, and it kind of reminded me of our little end of heaven way up here in the end of Northern California. And you mentioned fish ladders last time, and I had my friends listening to the show, and you said something about fish ladders, and then the music started playing, and you couldn't say anymore. But anyway, I wondered if you were aware of the fish kill of the baby salmon in the Klamath this year, where they say there's up to 91% of the baby salmon that are not going to return to the Klamath Trinity River system this year.
Because they've been killed, or because climate change or something,
It's a new disease called C. shastalis or C. sastius, and it comes straight from the lake, from the Klamath River dams, because what they have done, they've allowed them to become overfilled. They will be great topsoil when they're finally destroyed and taken out, but then by then all the salmon will be dead.
Wow.
But but fish ladders do absolutely zero good for baby fish. That's fish ladders, because baby fish don't swim downstream in slack water.
Right.
And I was just wondering if because you seem like you talked like you know a little bit about biology, but
yeah, I don't know that much about salmon, though. I confess, Gary. This is news to me.
Okay.
But I'll have to.
Yeah, but anyway, the Klamath River, it's a complete emergency on the North Coast, and there's no salmon fishing for the any of the commercials, which, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know. As long as there's a low salmon population, there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But even the Indians now, they're allotting the Hupa Indians 100 fish, the Karuk Indians 200 fish, and the Klamath or the Yurok Indians 625 fish. And they used to catch thousands every year.
Yeah, this is, and all over the world, we're seeing the world dying in front of us right now, and what I was seeing in Costa Rica was people putting the world back together, taking, building soil, building diversity, actually running a farm that had no plows, no tillage. All the agriculture was cooperative and collaborative as opposed to competitive. Gary, thanks a lot for the call. And in fact, this is one of the things that I had this long talk with Janine Benyus. We've got to get her on the program and talk about this. How when she was studying biology and forestry and whatnot in college in the 80s, the 70s and 80s, that what was taught was that plants are all competing with each other. In a forest, all these plants and trees and things, they're competing with each other for light and resources and water. And it turns out that's absolutely not true. They're cooperating with each other. There's this incredible web of life under the ground and above the ground And that collaborative, cooperative stuff, that's what we've got to start replicating in our agriculture. And that's what they're doing in this farm down there in Costa Rica that was just so amazing. Barbara in Devine, Texas. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Yeah, you were talking, 2 points. You were talking about trees breaking up the rocks to make soil, and that's their contribution to creating soil. You probably didn't have time to say that the leaves, twigs, the blossoms, everything they drop, that's organic matter and a lot of it. And the other thing is they collect animals that get under the shade or birds that are getting up in there and dust. So they're a collection. They collect organic matter and fertilizer and build the soil that way. Plus they protect it from the wind so it doesn't blow away so fast, and their roots hold it from erosion. That's what trees do. And in Africa, where the farmers are planting trees, and weed trees, just junk trees, and amongst their crops, they're getting like 50% improvement in
Yeah, and not only that, trees actually draw water into the soil, which seems counterintuitive because trees, evaporate a lot of water through their leaves, but that water has to be brought into the soil, and the process of drawing it deeper down into the soil thickens or deepens the topsoil. As the roots down there are drawing the water, it's causing more water to come in, to be absorbed through the surface. They're helping recharge that water battery. Yeah, spot on. Trees. Important stuff. Barbara, I got to move along, but thank you. Veronica in Teasdale, Utah. Hey, Veronica, what's up?
Hey, well, I'm really enjoying this discussion and the fact that you actually seem to know what you're talking about on this issue.
Well, to some
It's a
small
great
extent.
pleasure to hear that.
Thank you.
I just wanted to remark that the American Southwest has been for a number of decades the fastest desertifying area on the globe. And it's largely because of private livestock grazing on our public lands.
Yeah.
These guys are...
Which we all subsidize with our tax dollars, by the way.
Pardon me?
I said, which we all are subsidizing with our tax dollars. When ranchers are grazing cattle on public lands, they're paying a fraction of what they would pay if it was private lands, way below market price.
Right, and these public lands cattle are responsible for a higher percentage of endangered species, both plant and animal, than any other factor.
Yeah.
On our public lands.
Yeah, and this was
not to mention what they do to the archaeology, which is not pretty.
Well, and this is which takes us right back to the Bundy Ranch. I mean, those guys had been illegally grazing their cattle on public lands. They'd been, first of all, for the last 20 years, Cliven Bundy had been grazing his cattle on public lands where you pay this small amount to the government, and he was simply refusing to pay. So he owed the government like over $1 million over decades. But then the government said, all these cattle on this public land, whether you're paying or not, are doing extraordinary damage, and we're going to dial that damage and try and let the land recover itself. And so you've got to get your cattle off, whether you pay it or not. And we'll settle up the $1 million later. And that was the thing that provoked the confrontation. And Bundy, of course, was saying, I don't care about the environment, I don't care about the plants, I don't care about the ecology, I just want my money and my cows. And this is serious damage that it's doing.
Feral at this point.
I'm sorry, Veronica?
Farmer.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
He's a melon farmer. That's how he makes his money.
Cliven Bundy?
Yeah.
Huh.
He doesn't make any money on his cows. They're wild.
Oh, that's interesting.
He doesn't even know where they are.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, Veronica, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. We got, a lot more stuff to talk about. And we will get to our message, our important message, our president, eventually. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy. I'm on page 109. These are the title of the chapter is Myths About Democracy in America. Myth. Left to themselves, people would drain the treasury. Reality. They haven't. To the contrary, conservative administrations have. Conservatives are aggressively promoting the idea that democracy is doomed and should be replaced by an aristocracy of large corporations who already largely control the Republican Party because, they say, people are fundamentally lazy and will drain the treasury, simply voting themselves unlimited welfare benefits. This is a slur that is particularly directed against people of color by conservatives in the United States. This myth is especially ironic since the irresponsible fiscal policies of conservative presidents Reagan, George H.W., and George W. Bush mostly created today's budget deficits. Numerous conservative websites promote this myth by quoting Alexander Fraser Tytler, 1747 to 1813, a Scottish politician and historian who allegedly wrote in 1776, quote, "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years." End of quote. Given that USA is over 200 years old, that's a rather scary quote. The problem is that Lord Tytler had his facts wrong. At the time he wrote the statement, if he did, Bartlesby simply lists it as unverified, only one democracy had existed for more than a few decades, Athens. And its end had nothing whatsoever to do with people voting themselves benefits from the public treasury. In 1776, when the quote was supposedly written, the world's second democracy was just being birthed and wouldn't take full form for another decade, so it seems on its face nonsensical. Similarly, Tytler's description of the way nations with representative governments would fail is accurate only if you're counting those democracies that are corrupted by the wealthy and powerful to the point that they've become sham democracies and, in fact, have become feudal aristocracies where the feudal lords are the wealthy individuals or the powerful corporations. History and the experience of the world's mature democracy shows us clearly that when a majority of people participate in democracy, even simply by voting for the representatives, they don't vote to steal the wealth of the nation from themselves. Another myth, liberal democratic policies are socialism. The reality, democracy has nothing to do with collective ownership. Conservative commentators love to roll out this myth when people in a democratic society agree to tax themselves in order to provide for the common good. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting that we should, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. It says, in fact, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines socialism as any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods, a system of society or group living in which there is no private property, B, a system of condition of society which the stages of production are owned and controlled by the state. So then it goes back to the book. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting any of these things. Have you heard a conservative complain about our socialist police forces or about our socialist fire departments? Of course not, but they're paid for by taxes. Or our socialist roads or our socialist air traffic control system. Or, best of all, our socialist military with its strict rules that the highest paid may not make more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid, its comprehensive free healthcare system, and its subsidized housing. Indeed, the military might qualify as the most socialist institution in our government, though I doubt they'd like to be called that by conservatives or anyone else. So why do conservatives incessantly apply this label to programs that don't match the definition? It's because the word has such a negative reputation. Socialist and communist nations have, for the most part, been conspicuous failures, killing tens of millions of dissenters in the process. This is as using the word socialist as in the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics context. Modern democracy is not collective ownership, but a political system in which the voice of the people is not only heard in government, but is the government. The means of production and distribution of goods and services, except those having to do with the commons, like fire and police, should continue to be privately owned. But just as certainly, we the people must take back ownership of our government. This will remove us from Benito Mussolini's vision of a corporate state and leave us in the radical middle place of a constitutionally limited democratic republic, a modern liberal democracy. Myth. Free markets are nature's way of making the winner fit and strong. It's Darwin. Reality. Darwin's method led to more diversity, not less. Conservative activists love to complain about the dangers associated with the concentrated power of government. Indeed, anybody who's ever spent time in the third world, in dictatorships like the old Soviet Union, or in a repressive communist state like modern-day China, and I've worked in all three, understands how dangerous concentrated and unrestrained government power can be. The real problem, however, arises when there are gross inequalities in the size and difference and power of different entities in a culture. This is true whether the giant party is a powerful government, a powerful corporation, or a vastly powerful individual. In any case, ordinary people can find themselves in trouble without a thing they can do about it, no matter how great the injustice. And it goes on from there. The book is What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Did you see the Easter egg roll? I was outside the country, so I didn't see the coverage, but I understand that the media was, or the Easter egg, White House Easter egg event, the media was so desperate for, we've got to do some kind of positive Trump story, right? Because he's getting really upset with us, and we want to keep a relationship so that they'll give us people so that we can have a TV show, so that we can have, guests from the net, blah. It took Tommy Christopher. I've known Tommy for a couple of years. He's a great reporter here in Washington, D.C. It took Tommy Christopher to point out, Tommy Christopher was the first to point out, to the best of my knowledge, and I think he's working he used to work at Mediaite. I'm not sure exactly where he's working right now, but there's a post of his piece over at Democratic Underground right now, where he pointed out that pretty much all the kids were white. Now, why was that? Well, because they didn't invite any kids from the Washington, D.C. public schools. Normally, that's like, hey, we're going to have the Easter event on the White House lawn. Let's invite the local school kids. But a lot of those local school kids are black, and we want to have this kind of white event. And you might want to go back and look at some of the pictures now. I've seen a few of them, and yeah, it looks like there's a lot of little white kids. Which is not, there's nothing wrong with white kids, right? I was one once. But if you're doing something in Washington, D.C., or for our nation, I mean, you'd think, at least have something that's reasonably proportionate to the African American, the Hispanic, the Asian, the Native American communities. Pretty much only Caucasian European kids were represented there, at least according to the coverage I'm seeing. Maybe you saw something different. If so, feel free to call up and set me right on this. But, apropos of this, a new study just came out from, let me find this here. This is, we've got this science thing, march coming up next weekend. It's going to be pretty extraordinary. This new study showing that downwind from a coal-fired power plant. Now, keep in mind, Donald Trump has dialed back the protections. They call them regulations. I call them protections against poison coming out of coal-fired power plants. So now, under this Republican administration, the coal-fired power plants can dump more poison in our air. This from Samantha Page over at Climate Progress at thinkprogress.org. Coal-fired power plants linked to low birth weights in downwind communities. She writes, a new study on the birth weight of babies born in areas downwind of a coal-fired power plant has reached a troubling conclusion. Now, before I finish reading the sentence to you, just remember, Donald Trump fired 49 Tomahawk missiles into a sovereign country, Syria, the first time that we'd actually attacked that country, as opposed to attacked the people who were attacking that country, ISIS. The first time that we'd actually attacked that country, which completely changed the dynamic in the region, and frankly our involvement with it. And there's virtually no coverage of this. Which is just astonishing to me. But in any case, he did this because he said, "Oh, these babies are being gassed." We're gassing babies. So let me go back to this sentence. A new study on the birth weight of babies born in areas down, and obviously this isn't sarin, it's not killing them instantly, but a new study on the birth weight of babies born in areas downwind of a coal-fired power plant has reached a troubling conclusion. Babies in the study were 50% more likely to have low birth weights than their counterparts in non-affected areas. Author Muzi Yang, an associate professor of economics at Lehigh University, said that really this is a big effect. The study looked at 52,000 full-term births between 2004 and 2010 in 4 New Jersey counties that were immediately downwind of Pennsylvania's Portland Generating Station. That power plant has since been closed. But what they found, low birth weight has been correlated with increased rates of infant mortality. That's death. It's also correlated with health impacts later in life, including diabetes, heart disease, and high blood pressure. Current EPA head Scott Pruitt, former the Attorney General for Oklahoma, who did not join the most recent suit, was one of 14 attorneys general, along with fossil fuel and energy companies, who had challenged the initial rule. In other words, who fought against Obama's efforts to stop gassing the babies. So we're back to gassing babies here in the United States. Now, if somebody does it in Syria, we get all hysterical. But meanwhile, we've got this march coming up this weekend. And this from The Guardian. No, I'm sorry. This is from Common Dreams, and by Nadia Prupas, who is a staff writer for Common Dreams. I hope I'm pronouncing Nadia's name correctly. The headline is Trump White House taking marching orders from hundreds of CEOs. This was published on April 17th. Since his inauguration, President Donald Trump has met with at least 190 corporate executives, not including phone calls with heads of banks or his numerous Wall Street appointees. This is from Public Citizen. Public Citizen just published this report, and they named them, by the way, and their companies. You can find the whole thing. You can click through it. You can find it at publiccitizen.org, or you can go to commondreams.org and click through from that article. Just since the November election, he's met with 224 of these CEOs. One of every 5 of the corporate executives who met with the Trump administration, this is a quote from the Public Citizen report, one of every 5 within the first 100 days represented the banking or financial sector, a particular focus of Trump's criticisms during the campaign. Remember how he was always saying to people, oh, those banksters, they're robbing you, they're ripping you off, these guys are killers. He called them killers. These guys, and now, of course, hey, come on down to the White House. And by the way, they're no longer releasing the visitor logs from the White House, so we have no idea who's going, who's lobbying. He hasn't drained any swamps here. He's filling the swamp with the highest level of the apex predators in our business world. Robert Weissman, who's the head of Public Citizen, he says Donald Trump has asked America's CEOs for marching orders, and in meeting after meeting, they are happily issuing instructions. As best anyone can decipher what's going on in the White House, the CEOs are in charge now, and they are predictably advocating their narrow short-term profitability interests not what is in America's interest. Sheldon Adelson, David Koch, and Carl Linder III are among the wealthy benefactors whom Trump has met in the first 100 days. He's also entertained J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon, Andrew Liveris of Dow Chemical, and Doug McMillon of Walmart, along with 4 separate executives from Fox so-called News. Trump has not only betrayed the promises of candidate Trump by failing to break up special interest monopoly in Washington, D.C., but he has invited the special interests into the White House and asked them for guidance on how to deepen and perpetuate their monopolies, says Weissman. Yes, I agree. And this is why, when you look at this, this was from the Quinnipiac University poll back in February 23rd, 2017. Voters 54 to 38% support renegotiating major trade deals with other companies, countries, even if it means paying more for the products you buy. We're getting talk about this, but we're not seeing any action really in this regard. And they support 87 to 10. 87% of Americans support, 10% of Americans oppose increased federal spending for roads, mass transit, and other infrastructure. What's Trump doing? He's dialing back those things. That would be federal spending. He's saying, oh, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it with private money. We're going to turn everything into toll roads. 62% of Americans are against reducing taxes across the board. They're opposed to cutting taxes. 62% of Americans. Because, we all know it's a scam, right? Average people might get $30 or $100 or $200 a year. But the billionaires, they're going to make out like bandits. 51% opposed restarting the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines. 60% are against building a wall with Mexico. 78% are against lowering any taxes whatsoever on wealthy people. 50% are opposed to lowering taxes on business and corporations. 54% are opposed to removing regulations on business and corporations. 54%, only 34% are in favor of it. Only 27% say we should be removing specific regulations intended to combat climate change. 63% of Americans think that we should keep those regulations. We should strengthen those regulations. 59% of voters say marijuana should be legal in the United States. I mean, this is just like, but do you see any of this stuff being made into law? No. Instead, you're seeing the exact opposite. Why? Because Trump is inviting CEOs into the White House and saying, gee, guys, tell me what to do. And they're telling him. And he's doing it. And, the entire Republican Party has been operating this way for a long, long time. It shouldn't be a total surprise. But here it is. And there was a busted up a major terrorist incident that I'm betting the corporate news didn't even tell you about. I'll tell you about that after the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Terrorism and your calls. Just a minute. And welcome back. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, thanks for watching Free Speech on DirecTV. What's up?
Oh, hi, Dr. Tom. I wasn't expected to be picked up so quick. I wanted to let you know that when Bentley was governor, he refused to call for a special election to replace our senator. And now our new governor, Kay Ivey, has just made an announcement on our local news that there will be a special election on August the 8th. And there are still questions as to how our Senator Luther Strange became senator under Bentley, because he failed to prosecute Bentley last year.
Oh, interesting.
And so there are rumors of obstruction of justice charges coming up on that.
It could go all the way to the United States Senate.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and so, like I said, that election will be on August the 8th, August the 5th, and it's 2 months late. And then that's the primary, and then the election will be, I think she said, in October.
Has there been any? I mean, you live in Alabama. I'm just reading stories about it. Has there been anything in the press about Bentley shutting down these 31 DMV offices just before the election, so people couldn't get voter IDs?
Well, the article you were reading probably came from al.com. If you go back out to al.com, you will find articles about Martha Mason and her influence over Bentley in getting those driver's license offices closed down.
Who is Martha Mason?
That was the woman, his special
the woman he was having the affair with.
Yes, and we still do not know exactly where her salary came from, and so there are still ongoing investigations as to how this all came about.
Wow.
And but like I said, there will be a special election, and there are probably going to be charges brought against Luther Strange. That is the rumor for not prosecuting Bentley last year. It cost us more money, and it created embarrassment for the state. And probably, there's some people who already announced they will run. One is a Democrat who ran last year against Richard Shelby, who will be 83 next month. But we could not educate people to try and read the ballot and know who was on it before they walked in there and just hit a button.
Right.
And that was part of our problem. But we also are having a town hall here in Montgomery, which we have asked Martha Roby and Mike Rogers to show up, and we have not heard from them, nor have we heard from Terry Sewell. Those are 3 representatives here. But on that list of people who are going to run for governor and run for the Senate seats, we have a strange group, including Roy Moore. And
Crazy Judge Moore, the Ten Commandments judge.
Yes, and but what was I going to? But anyway, also that coal plant, the one that was causing the problem that got this law passed, is actually in Mississippi, and that will be dumping coal over the western part of Alabama, which is a poor area.
Wow.
Coal dust.
Of course.
Yes, but people need to be paying attention to what's going on and figure out a way to do something about it. And I can't remember what else I was going to tell you.
Well, that's a lot. Don Siegelman was your governor, right?
Yes, he was.
He's getting a new investigation into the propriety of the original prosecution now.
Well, that goes back to Carl Rowe and McGregor.
Yep.
If you look at al.com, you'll find the guy who was fired from the Advertiser for writing the correct part about Milton McGregor and Victory Land and why his machines wound up in the Creek Indian Nation. They were illegal in his place, but legal in the.
Norma, I gotta run, but thank you very much for the information.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, I promised you the terrorism story. I am guessing. I might be wrong. This is from the American Statesman, which is a newspaper, a Texas newspaper. And statesman.com is the website. And I guarantee you, if this guy had brown skin and his name was Mohammed, the president would be tweeting about it. It would be all over the news. It would be, wall to wall, everywhere. But instead, this is published yesterday in the Statesman. The headline: FBI says Austin man plotting mass shooting arrested on weapons charge. Federal officials say they might have foiled a mass shooting in Austin this month, according to a criminal complaint filed Monday in U.S. Western District Court. A confidential source told the FBI that Stephen Thomas Bale, 50, is a right-wing extremist who had planned the attack. So are you going to hear from Fox? Hey, a terrorist. He was going to kill people. The 6-page filing did not give many specifics about the alleged plot, but does reveal that on April 12th, Austin police seized 3 guns and about 1,100 rounds of ammunition from a North Austin residence where Bale had been staying. The document says the source told authorities Bale, quote, exhibits sovereign citizen extremism ideology, end quote. He was banned by purchasing firearms because of a 93 misdemeanor assault conviction in Connecticut. But, he has them anyway. And there we go. An attempted terrorist incident, a mass shooting that this guy was planning, this hardcore right-winger, was foiled by the FBI or foiled by the Texas police. Have you heard anything about it? I haven't, other than that one story in the Texas paper. Kyle in Enid, Oklahoma. Hey, Kyle, what's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. I just wanted to bring up something about maybe a little different idea on why Trump might be going after some of these countries and starting shooting and firing missiles into them. Tillerson has been off on his own quite a bit since Trump got elected. And I was a commodity broker for a number of years. And Tillerson and Exxon were pretty famous back then for going out and instigating conflicts, in some cases small wars, that would escalate the price of oil. And pretty much now, $60 crude would just about be every oil man's wet dream. And people think, well, what good would that do if he just shot it up there? But you have to realize that the Exxons of the world could hedge 4 or 5 years out of production. They only need it up there for a very short amount of time to hedge a number of years' production. And I would like to suggest that they are actually the gassing of the children was the excuse that they needed to try to get something started.
So, in other words, if I can just boil this down real quickly, Kyle, what you're saying is that by promoting military instability with his policies in Syria and North Korea, Donald Trump is driving up the price of oil, and that works to the benefit of the oil billionaires who helped put him into office, or Republicans all across the country anyway, which included him, and the oil multimillionaire who is his Secretary of State and the companies associated with him.
And they've done it before. This would not be a new thing. They will focus in the Middle East, and they're going to focus on trying to get a conflict started that's going to shut down the straits, which would restrict the price of oil or the flow of oil. We've got more, as you know, we've got more oil than we know what to do with, more energy of all types. But it's one shot. If they could just get it up to $60.
Just for a week or two, then they can place all their bets. Fascinating. Kyle, thanks a lot for the call. I suspect you may well be right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Our book today is Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind
What Would Jefferson
and Create Emotional
Do? Return to
Well-Being.
Democracy.
And we're reading starting on page 2.
I'm on page 109. These are
the human body
title
is
of
a
the chapter is
self-healing
Myths
organism.
About Democracy
When you cut your
in
finger,
America.
it heals. If you break your leg,
Myth.
it heals.
Left
Even
to
if part of you
themselves,
is cut
people
out
would
in
drain
surgery, the
treasure.
surgeon's wound
Reality.
heals.
They
heal
haven't.
from
To the
bacterial
contrary,
and viral
conservative
invasions, from
administrations
injuries,
have.
from all variety of
Conservatives
traumas.
are aggressively
The mechanisms
promoting
of
the
healing
idea that
are built
democracy is
into us.
doomed and should be
5 million
replaced by
years
an
of evolution, or
aristocracy
the grace of
large
God, or both, have made our
corporations
bodies
who already
automatic
largely
healing
control the
machines.
Republican Party because
So why
they
wouldn't the
say
same
people
be
are
true of
fundamentally
our
lazy and will
minds
drain
and
the
our emotions?
treasury, simply
All of the
voting
traumas
themselves
that we
unlimited
experience in life leave
welfare
their wounds.
benefits.
If humankind
This is
hadn't had
absurd.
ways
It is
of healing from those
particularly directed against
emotional
people
and
of color by
psychological blows,
conservatives in
over
the United
time
States.
society would have become
This myth is
progressively
especially
less functional.
ironic since the irresponsible
Instead, history
fiscal
shows us that people
policies of
usually
conservative
recover
presidents
from even
Reagan,
the most
George
severe
H.W.,
psychological
George
wounds,
W. Bush
often learning
mostly
great
created
lessons or
today's
gaining
budget
important
deficits.
insights in the
Numerous
recovery
conservative
process.
websites promote
The
this
famous
myth by
Hawaii
quoting Alexander
longitudinal
Fraser
study of
Tytler,
children raised in stressful,
1747
disadvantaged conditions. They were
1813, a Scottish
migrant farm workers.
politician and historian who allegedly wrote in 1776, quote, "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years." End of quote. Given that USA is over 200 years old, that's a rather scary quote. The problem is that Lord Tytler had his facts wrong. At the time he wrote the statement, if he did, Bartlesby simply lists it as unverified, only one democracy had existed for more than a few decades, Athens. And its end had nothing whatsoever to do with people voting themselves benefits from the public treasury. In 1776, when the quote was supposedly written, the world's second democracy was just being birthed and wouldn't take full form for another decade, so it seems on its face nonsensical. Similarly, Tytler's description of the way nations with representative governments would fail is accurate only if you're counting those democracies that are corrupted by the wealthy and powerful to the point that they've become sham democracies and, in fact, have become feudal aristocracies where the feudal lords are the wealthy individuals or the powerful corporations. History and the experience of the world's mature democracy shows us clearly that when a majority of people participate in democracy, even simply by voting for their representatives, they don't vote to steal the wealth of the nation from themselves. Another myth, liberal democratic policies are socialism. The reality, democracy has nothing to do with collective ownership. Conservative commentators love to roll out this myth when people in a democratic society agree to tax themselves in order to provide for the common good. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting that we should, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. It says, in fact, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines socialism as any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods, a system of society or group living in which there is no private property, B, a system of condition of society which the stages of production are owned and controlled by the state. So then it goes back to the book. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting any of these things. Have you heard a conservative complain about our socialist police forces or about our socialist fire departments? Of course not, but they're paid for by taxes. Or our socialist roads or our socialist air traffic control system, or best of all, our socialist military with its strict rules that the highest paid may not make more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid, its comprehensive free healthcare system and its subsidized housing. Indeed, the military might qualify as the most socialist institution in our government, though I doubt they'd like to be called that by conservatives or anyone else. So why do conservatives incessantly apply this label to programs that don't match the definition? It's because the word has such a negative reputation. Socialist and communist nations have, for the most part, been conspicuous failures, killing tens of millions of dissenters in the process. This is as using the word socialist as in the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics context. Modern democracy is not collective ownership, but a political system in which the voice of the people is not only heard in government, but is the government. The means of production and distribution of goods and services, except those having to do with the commons, like fire and police, should continue to be privately owned. But just as certainly, we the people must take back ownership of our government. This will remove us from Benito Mussolini's vision of a corporate state and leave us in the radical middle place of a constitutionally limited democratic republic, a modern liberal democracy. Myth. Free markets are nature's way of making the winner fit and strong. It's Darwin. Reality. Darwin's method led to more diversity, not less. Conservative activists love to complain about the dangers associated with the concentrated power of government. Indeed, anybody who's ever spent time in the third world in dictatorships like the old Soviet Union or in a repressive communist state like modern-day China, and I've worked in all three, understands how dangerous concentrated and unrestrained government power can be. The real problem, however, arises when there are gross inequalities in the size and difference and power of different entities in a culture. This is true whether the giant party is a powerful government, a powerful corporation, or a vastly powerful individual. In any case, ordinary people can find themselves in trouble without a thing they can do about it, no matter how great the injustice. And it goes on from there. The book is What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Michael in Ohio, in Westerville, Ohio. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, lots of things, Tom. Hope your weather up in D.C. is as nice as it is here in Columbus.
It is a beautiful day. It's in the low 70s. Just perfect.
You've talked in the past about charter schools, and of course our educational secretary, Betsy DeVos, who is all in favor of that. There's going to be some pushback coming this month, and I just wanted to let you and your listeners know Ohio Congressman and former Ohio Congressman and presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich, who I haven't heard from in a while, is going to be doing a series of town hall meetings around Ohio about charter schools titled The Impact of the Failed Charter School Industry on Public Education and Taxpayers.
Wow, great. And good on Dennis.
He's going to start on the 24th, and if I can, I wanted to give the 4 locations, and
sure,
the people
go for it.
Check on it themselves. First of all, he's giving a press conference at the State House here in Columbus, Ohio, at 10 o'clock on Monday the 24th, and the public, of course, is welcome to attend. Then that evening, he'll be speaking at the Miami Valley UU Church in Dayton at 6:30. Tuesday, he'll be here in Columbus at First UU Church on Weisheimer in Columbus at 6:30 also. And on Wednesday, the 26th, at Parma, in the Parma Library at 7 p.m., and ending this particular sequence in Lorraine at the Educational Service Center on Thursday, the 27th at 6:30. He says in his flyer, $10 billion taxpayer dollars have been diverted to charter schools in Ohio since 2000. And the statistics are amazing. He's not talking about, the charter schools that are specifically oriented towards special education, but the for-profit corporate-run charter schools that are just milking our country and, of course, Ohio like crazy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of exciting, we think, and this may be just the beginning of a larger pushback that'll come along.
Great.
We'll be filming our session here on Tuesday, and hope to have it on YouTube shortly thereafter.
Great. Michael, please, post it on our daily blog, too, at thomhartmann.com, and let us know how it works out, okay?
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thanks a lot for the call. Nicole in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Hey, Nicole, what's up?
Oh, hi. I was just sort of going to piggyback on the comment that you made about this guy that there was no news coverage, this terrorist. We had a similar incident in Wisconsin where a guy, he broke into a gun store and stole 13 guns, wrote a 160-page manifesto to Donald Trump, and he was going to do numerous attacks. I mean, there was like a statewide search for this man with 150 police officers. Did you hear about that nationally?
No, not a word. But if his name had been Mohammed or his skin had been brown, it would have been all over.
Exactly. And this was a white guy with a name like Jabkowski. So,
right.
This is really ridiculous.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It really is. Nicole, thanks for that. I guess it would be an analogy. No, for that story. I appreciate it. Chris in Las Vegas. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom. Whatever happened to your buddy Carl Wolfson? He kind of threw like a hissy fit on X-Ray FM and then just decided.
I don't know, Chris. I haven't talked to Carl in a while.
It seems like he was.
Yeah, no, let's just stop right there. I really don't want to talk about other talk show hosts on this program. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss?
Well, I guess I'm a Republican naysayer, and you had talked about the governor of Alabama, Bentley, trying voter suppression. It seems to me like if voter suppression is perfectly legal and nobody's going to jail over it. It seems to me that it's a perfectly acceptable tactic to benefit our coalition to suppress votes. And, I know that it's like really
Yeah, Jim
bad.
Crow is perfectly legal. Poll taxes were perfectly legal until we made them illegal. I think that we need to make this illegal too. I really do. Chris, thanks a lot for the call. Bill in Selby, South Dakota. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I called in a little bit ago when you were still on the subject of carbon sequestration, so that's going to be the subject of my call.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have to agree with you that stopping the burning of fossil fuels is only about half of the solution, and that we do need to sequester it. And putting it back into the soil is probably the best way to do it. I think somebody did the math that if 40% of the Earth's grasslands were managed correctly, that we could actually get the CO2 levels back to pre-industrial levels. And anyway,
That was the claim Alan Savory made. There are others who are saying that Alan is overstating the case, but whether he's overstating it or not, there is a lot of truth to it. Yeah.
Right. And I'm from north central South Dakota, and I personally know some producers here that are doing that. Gabe Brown is almost world famous, I think. I would encourage you to do a little research on him, but he's increased organic matter in his soils from less than 2% up to 7, 8, 10%, and it also has increased the water infiltration tremendously. He can get an 8-inch rain and he doesn't have any runoff.
Right, exactly, because the organic matter holds the water, and it turns the soil basically into a sponge, into a giant water battery. And organic, by the way, simply means carbon containing. So we're talking carbon sinks. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that give me a little hope. There's not enough producers doing this, but it's growing a little bit. I was also going to talk about. I know you're a vegan, and I respect that, but there's also health benefits to if you're going to eat meat. Make sure it's preferably organic and grass based, because there's more CLAs in grass finished beef.
Oh yeah, it's a completely different
omega-3s. It's much better for you.
Yeah, a completely different profile of fatty acids associated with cows that are or any kind of animal that is fed the environment that it evolved, or the food with which it evolved, versus grains and things. Bill, thanks. Well said. Russell in Hickory Hills, Illinois. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, this might be a wasted call. Now that I'm retired, I hear the far right, the far left. What is the far left? Who are some of the people in it? What are their ideas?
Yeah.
And can they be off the main grid so bad that we can't vote for them? Because that's all I ever hear is the far left. Who are some of the people in the far left?
The far left, in my mind, the far left is made up of the Communist Party of the United States, which has a few hundred members, a couple of small anarchist groups, this group out of New York. I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name, but there's a little cult that follows him around, and they run. Say that again. Yeah, Babavakian. Yeah, and basically the far left is, it's like 100th% of the American population. It's inconsequential. It has no political power. And at the worst, what they do is they screw up things for everybody else by showing up at Trump's inauguration and smashing windows, but weirdly enough, people like me and progressive Democrats and Bernie and whatnot are labeled the far left by our corporate media, because from a corporation's point of view that believes that corporations should have all the power and government and we the people should have none of the power, that seems like a lefty idea. That sounds like the far left. And so what has happened is our media has rebranded basically FDRism, New Dealism, Great Societyism into, quote, far left, when actually it represents the desires of the mainstream of America. The vast majority of Americans, probably somewhere on the, between 65 and 80% of Americans, support the ideas of the New Deal and of the Great Society. But that has to be marginalized in order to keep taxes low on the billionaires and to keep the corporations unregulated or deregulated. And so they refer to that as the far left. The far right, we know, it's like this guy with the guns who is going to go out and shoot people up. And the far right is historically, typically has been highly marginalized. But now, with a bunch of far right figures in the White House, the far right has kind of come into its own, and which is, in my opinion, concerning, shall we say. And now you've got even Alex Jones now is kind of walking back from it. Of course, it's in his divorce papers, I guess he's saying, well, I'm just a performance artist. Right. I will tell you right up front, I am not a performance artist. What I'm saying is what I believe. Russell, thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, and we're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world in just a few minutes. Welcome back. Ed, watching Free Speech TV in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I wanted to talk to you about a study that I had heard was going to be done back in about 1990 or so, and it came. The U.S. government commissioned it, and then they buried it. I got a copy of it. There was a coupon from the U.S. government printing office about recent publications they had, and I checked it off and sent it to them, and they sent me a copy of it. And then about 2 months later, I asked for more copies, and I called them up, and they said, "No, we're sorry, that doesn't exist." And I said, "Yeah, I got it from you." And they said, "No, that's not possible. You couldn't have got it from us." And I read them the title off of it, and I read them the number off of it, the U.S. government printing office number. And they said, "Well, no, we never published it." It was a study about the effects of power line radiation, the 60-cycle hum that we're all familiar with if you touch your stereo or whatever. Right. It pervades our air. The people that had done the study went around in the cities and looked at the people that were living in the apartments on the side of the street where the transformers were, and their babies had a much higher incidence of leukemia than the people on the other side of the street. Other kinds of cancers were cropping up too, but I remember leukemia was a big one. Yeah. And that survey was paid for by the government and was buried by the government. It was. Well, I can maybe fill in a little more for you on that, Ed. Back when I started in radio, I also got a broadcast engineer's license in addition to a ham radio license. And there was a study that came, and I worked in a radio station where, actually, in one of my jobs, I had to come in the morning, turn on the transmitters, tune the antenna, get everything going, get the radio station going, and then I did the morning show. And that was, up in a little town in northern Michigan. And back in 1960, whatever it was, 1970, I think it was. And there was a study that came out around that time in the 70s, because I was in the business. And a number of broadcast engineers were quite freaked out about it, that suggested that people who worked as broadcast engineers had higher rates of particular types of cancer. And I think it was leukemia. It might have been lymphoma, but I'm pretty sure it was leukemia also, which is the cancer of the bone marrow, I believe, or cancer of the blood. And the initial assumption was that it was, high levels of RF, of radio frequency radiation. Because, in fact, Whittle, the WITL, the station that I worked at for 10 years, the towers were right on the grounds. You look out the window and 200 feet away is the main tower. It turns out, though, that it probably has more to do with the chemicals that they were using for cooling the transformers and in building some of the electrolytic capacitors, that these chemicals had high levels of dioxin in them, and as a byproduct of the manufacture of the coolant, and that they would, when they really heated up, that some of that would gas off. And so there was this debate going on in the 80s and 90s about whether it was the chemicals in the transformers and the high capacity electrolytic capacitors, or whether it was the radiation. And to the best of my knowledge, that debate was never resolved, although I think the conventional wisdom was that it was the chemistry, not the radiation, which might be why they pulled the study. But Ed, I don't know the status of that science now. I just remember that. I remember thinking, uh-oh. And, I'd been a ham radio operator when I was, 11, 12. Well, I got my first license when I was 12 or 13 years old. And I used to build, transmitters. I had one in my bedroom, and I had an antenna right outside the window.
and wondering what did it do. So I've been keeping track of it. Ed, if you learn more, let me know. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and we may or may not be getting a call from Talk Media News. We'll find out. In the meantime, Ivory in Oroville, California. Hey, Ivory, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I was just wanted to talk about the town hall I attended last night.
Mm-hmm.
It was with Doug LaMalfa, Congressman Doug LaMalfa here in District 1 here in California.
He is which party?
He's Republican.
Okay.
This is a predominantly Republican area.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I noticed was that everybody seemed to agree on single-payer health care. But Doug just still tries to push the Republican effort, which is Trump care,
Right. Yeah.
They still push the same platitudes and stuff like that. And one thing I noticed last night is people are tired of that, Republican or not. I talked to a lot of people who were very conservative in their ideology, but still agreed with single payer.
Well, if you talk to British conservatives, you talk to French conservatives, you talk to Dutch conservatives, they're all in favor of single payer, and they like those single payer, Canadian conservatives for that matter, because they would say that it's the conservative thing to do. We are spending every year in the United States $608 billion propping up the health insurance industry that doesn't even exist in countries that have single payer. So we are wasting $608 billion a year that could be instead being used for heart transplants and wellness checkups. So it would make perfect sense that Republicans would support single payer. But you're not going to find elected Republicans supporting single payer because they're taking hundreds of millions of dollars from the banksters who call themselves health insurance companies, but don't do a damn thing for making anybody well. Ivory, thank you for the report. I got to move along here because Patrick Gavin just called in from Talk Media News. And Patrick, what's going on in the world today?
Hey, all eyes here in Washington are obviously down south in Georgia's 6th congressional district, where there's an open race for HHS Secretary Tom Price, former House seat in the Atlantic suburbs, and John Ossoff, the Democratic kind of come from behind wonder kid down there. If he can pull this off, there's a lot of folks here in D.C., Republicans especially, who really wonder whether or not this is sort of a sign of things to come. I think it's clear that the media, at least, will probably portray this election as a reflection on Trump's presidency thus far. I mean, this is a pretty reliably safe Republican district, and for a Democratic.
Yeah, I lived there for 13 years.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, Newt used to be my congressman. We lived in Marietta.
Oh, that's unbelievable. What's your prediction for tonight?
I don't know. I still have a lot of friends in that area, and I'm on a monthly listserv with a local business group that I had helped start actually, and we'd get together once a month and have dinner, and the area has become more upscale and more progressive, interestingly. But whether I just don't know. I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of right-wing billionaire money coming in that's not being measured, that's not included in the metrics, because typically that you can't even find that stuff out until 6 months or a year later. But it'll be interesting. I think just the fact that Ossoff is doing as well as he is, whether he wins or not, just like with Thompson in Kansas, in David Koch's district or Charles Koch's district. I see these already as signs of what's going to happen in 2018.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There was I want to say it was the Public Citizen or for the Center for Public Integrity. One of them did take a look at least the finances that we have now, and that race is 1 cent locally for every $10 spent nationally. So, I mean, it is getting a ton of money from around the country, and it's obviously sort of kind of a Rorschach test for people who love Trump or don't love Trump, and
right.
And sort of their first opportunity to really to make their voice be heard. So yeah, eyes will be. I think it's clear that Ossoff will get the most votes. The question is whether or not he'll reach that 50% threshold. Other news: we're 10 days away from another government shutdown. In wonderful news, There's really no reason right now to think that the shutdown won't actually happen. I think that the real key here is obviously the House Freedom Caucus and then also Democrats as well. I mean, no matter what, Republicans will have to get some Democratic votes to stave off a government shutdown. And I think on top of that, the House Freedom Caucus, which really has kind of the numbers now to really dictate the debate on the right, will probably, I think, brace and brawl for some more border funding. And I think that's really one of the key issues that's going to take place during this government shutdown fight is really how much money is the government, both Republicans and Democrats, willing to spend on the border. Is it going to be an actual border wall, which is obviously much more expensive, or can they say, just get away with saying, oh, we'll spend more money on policing the border or monitoring the border with technology, and perhaps I can save them a bit of money. But there's so many from the IRS and the EPA cuts and boosting Pentagon spending and obviously cutting funding for Obamacare. I mean, each one of these issues are their own sort of tinderbox, but they all kind of need to be resolved a little bit, at least, in order to save yet another government shutdown in 10 days.
It's going to be real interesting. And it's kind of the Paul Ryan Democrats, or Republicans, versus the I call them the cokeheads, the Freedom Caucus Republicans, what used to be called the Tea Party Republicans.
Yeah, and I think, too, this also, this puts Trump in a weird position where, it may force him to, and maybe he doesn't care, but it may force him to go against a lot of his campaign promises about domestic spending and boosting military spending and defunding Planned Parenthood and, punish sanctuary cities and all these things. And these are all...
Well, they got the defunding Planned Parenthood signed. He signed that last Thursday in a private ceremony.
Did he really?
Yeah, it got through the legislature and he signed it. There was no publicity about it at all, but he signed it. Individual states can now refuse to reimburse Planned Parenthood for services provided through their Medicaid systems.
Egg on my face for not knowing that. Well, there you go.
Well, it's not just your face. I don't think, I guess probably 99% of Americans have no idea.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So we'll keep our eyes on that. And then the last thing I was just going to talk quickly with you guys about is sort of the latest update on tax reform before August, which increasingly looks unrealistic. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said the health care debate had really set back the timeline for tax reform. And what's interesting, I think, too, about this, I don't think that this will be a huge stick in the mud politically, but combining the debate over tax reform with the fact that President Trump's not releasing his own tax reforms or tax returns, I think is going to be one of these salient political points, and I think an effective tool for Democrats.
It certainly is for Democrats. I don't know. I mean, you talk to a lot of conservative stations and talk show hosts. Do any of them care?
But about the tax returns?
Yeah, about Trump's tax returns. My sense of it is that Republicans, that they just don't care.
No, you're right. There's not. And I think, I think Trump sort of successfully made that argument, and so far been right that at least he thinks his base at least doesn't care about tax returns, and
right.
So far.
Yeah, they just want him to do the stuff he said he'd do. So
right.
Destroy
and I think
the state.
Really interesting now because maybe in some alternate universe he could argue that his tax returns pre 2015 don't have to be released.
Right.
But now that he's president, that's a whole nother ballgame. And so to not release what he has now going forward really doesn't hold water.
Yeah.
I mean, the previous one didn't either, but now he's going to have a very hard time. Keeping his tax returns out.
My personal conspiracy theory on this, Patrick, is that he won't do that because it would demonstrate, it would tell us all that he's really not a billionaire, and that in fact he may be underwater. He's been underwater much of his life.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't he be underwater right now?
So it's less criminal than embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's what I think. Anyhow, Patrick Gavin, Talk Media News. Thank you, Patrick.
Take care.
Good talking. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last two chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower. There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections. Yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst, a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how, during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference, bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK. Despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer for no reason at all, and addled Ruby, a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by three mafia godfathers, Carlos Marcello, New Orleans, Santo Trafficante, Tampa, Florida, and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All three were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd, JFK called off his motorcade, and then in Tampa on November 18th. He survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal. Extinction.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm super pleased to have with me in the studio Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal. She's a former ER doctor, now non-practicing, and a New York Times reporter for 22 years, now editor-in-chief of the Kaiser Health News, and she has a new book out. It's called An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. And we'll get a picture of that up on the screen in a moment here. Dr. Rosenthal, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. You need to be within about 3 inches of that microphone, so I can just move it a little closer to you. There we go. It's the old eat the mic thing here.
Okay.
So tell us about what prompted you to write this book in the first place? What need did you see that needed to be filled in terms of information?
Yeah, I'd been a journalist for decades, but this was the first time I felt compelled to write a book. I come from a family of physicians. I trained as a physician, but I saw that U.S. medicine had moved from being focused on a caring profession that I cared a lot about to a commercial enterprise, and that many of the motivations behind the care we get now are financial motivations rather than what's good for our health. And that really bothered me. I did a series for the New York Times called Paying Till It Hurts about the high price of medical care. And when I was done with that, we did a lot of social media, and I got literally tens of thousands of comments, people's stories about not that they didn't like their care, but the burdens that the financial costs were putting on them and the difficult choices they were having to make, that I thought, I can't not write a book about this. I have to do something with this material. And so I set about writing a book. And my goal, I think, is to say to people, look, this is unsustainable. It's unsupportable. And when you look at how health policy is made in this country, the insurers are at the table, the pharma's at the table, hospitals are at the table, doctors' groups, but patients don't have a voice. And so part of my kind of mission here is to say to patients, we deserve a voice, you can have a voice, and it's time for us to make this a voting issue. Frankly, in my new position at Kaiser Health News, we were looking during the presidential debates last year to pick out bits on healthcare, and there was almost nothing there, even though we know for Americans now, as we're seeing in the town halls the last few months, it's not only an issue of health, it's an issue, it's a pocketbook issue, and we all deserve a lot better value for what we and our government and our nation is paying for our health care.
Yeah. I remember in 86, 87, my wife and I and our 3 kids lived in Germany for a year. And one of our next door neighbors became a good friend, and he was a physician. His name was Dr. Geert. And I remember talking with him about how much money he made, which is not a topic that typically you talk about, but he wanted to know about American medicine. And he had been to the United States a couple of times, but not as a tourist. And he said he made, as I recall, and this was in the 1980s, but I translated in my head from Deutschmarks at that time into U.S. dollars, that he was making around $120,000 a year, about twice what a factory worker would make, about twice the average kind of salary. And that he was quite happy with that. He lived a nice middle-class life, and he said something like, I understand in the United States you have doctors who can literally become millionaires, multimillionaires. And I was like, yeah. And he said, that would never happen here. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, not only because the way the system is organized, but because here in Germany, if somebody goes into medicine, they do it because they want to heal people.
Right.
Whereas in America, it seems to me, he was saying to me, some people go into medicine because they want to get rich. And that seems like the absolute wrong reason to do it. How do we, first of all, was his analysis accurate, or my analysis of his analysis? And secondly, what do we do about that? And that's just looking at one little slice of it. I mean, we could say the same thing about pharma and hospitals and...
Right. Right. And I think that has become a bigger and bigger problem. Look, my dad was a doctor. We were comfortably middle class, but we were not the rich people in town. And I think the only good reason to go into medicine is because you want to help people. If you want to get rich, there are plenty of better ways to do that, right? But what's happened as these financial incentives have kind of insinuated their way into not a medical guy anymore. When I was training, the CEO of hospitals was a doctor. It was a senior doctor. Now it's a finance guy, and the doctors sound almost Marxist. They're like, we're the labor here, and why is that guy making $4 million? And I think the kind of greed feeds on itself in a way, or not greed. It's more a sense of I'm being undervalued. I worked really hard, and I think the sad thing now is, because our system, again, because of the financial incentives, we overvalue people who do procedures and undervalue the kind of physicians we all say we care about, the ones who will spend some time talking to you or will think about a problem and not just order a bunch of tests. So I think we have this weird dynamic right now in medicine where some people, particularly specialists who do procedures, are paid far more than in other countries. And a lot of the primary care doctors, the doctors we all say we want to spend more time with us, less time looking in their computers, are probably undervalued or about this valued at similar amounts to overseas. So I think, when people say to me, who's the bad guy, who's going to have to reduce their financial expectations in healthcare? My answer is most everyone. That I think it's the whole system. There's
twice as expensive as any place on earth.
There's not one bad guy. And I think many doctors rightly feel that they're under a lot of stress now because the insurers are trying to get money from them. The hospitals are telling them what to do with their patients. And the sad thing is, who's getting harmed by the system? Patients who are caught in the middle of this big financial kind of grab to see who can get all this money sloshing away, 20% of our economy. And the doctors who are just trying to do the right thing and not thinking about the financial incentives. I hear from cardiologists who will say, it just doesn't seem right to me. I'm not ordering a lot of tests. I'm working hard to give my patients good care. And the guy down the block is opening a cath center and doing 1 million tests. And he's making $2 million a year. And, here I am. And my point to medical students, actually, because there's a lot of angst among students, is this a good profession to go into? People tell me, all that. And I always say, look, I know, unfortunately, too many unemployed journalists. I know lots of unemployed lawyers, bankers, but I don't know any unemployed doctors. There will be a job. You will be paid reasonably well. You may not be the richest person on your block, but that's not the reason to go into medicine anyway.
Amen. So how do we where do we begin? We just have a couple minutes left here. If we want to rebuild our healthcare system into one that actually works,
Yeah.
do we look at Canada? Do we look at most of the European countries? Do we look at Switzerland, which has no central system, but everything is required by law to be not-for-profit?
Right.
I mean, which model, or do we invent something altogether new?
Well, I mean, I have my preferences, but as journalist, I can't say them, But what I think I've learned from researching the book is there are lots of different models that work. The Swiss model is much more market-oriented, not centralized, but there is a degree of price regulation, right? It's not just a free market. You can go to a national system like Canada's or Great Britain's, which are quite popular. People like the care they get there. We don't see Canadians streaming over the border for U.S. healthcare. So I think what we have to do as a nation is stop getting into these, kind of fine line debates about do we prefer this solution or that solution. We have to pick one and just do it. And that system has to involve a degree of confronting our pricing and cost problem head on. We can't kind of expect the market to take care of it because as we've seen over and over again, it doesn't, it won't. And no other country has managed to do it without some degree of price regulation, control, negotiation, whatever you want to call it. And I think we see in this last election, look, Medicare does price regulation. People tend to like Medicare. In the last election, we've seen both Democrats and some Republicans talk about, why can't Medicare negotiate drug prices? Every other country on earth does it.
Well, they can't because the Republicans wrote it into legislation.
Right, way back when. But now everyone's saying this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. Well, there's kind of an easy solution which has worked in the rest of the world. Politically, we seem to find it unacceptable. But politically, we as patients and voters find these prices unacceptable. So we should be voting that issue in a way that we haven't in the past. But I think as we see in the town halls, people are kind of waking up to this. And I hope one reason I wrote the book is so people would understand that we don't have to accept this system. You can fight back individually, and you should vote your patient/consumer interests.
We're talking with Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal, the author of a new book, An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. Okay, we just talked about taking it back. How did it become big business in the first place?
Well, that was a fascinating story to me personally because I really wanted to understand. I'd been a foreign correspondent for 10 years. So when I left the U.S., prices were kind of heading up, but not so terribly bad. By the time I got back in 2007, it was crazy. I came back and I was getting an inhaler that I remembered costing $10, and suddenly it was $100, even though it was an old medicine, it was off patent, and I was like, what is going on here? So for me, this was a lot of kind of historical exploration. And what we see is that this system of profit kind of unspooled slowly in the last 25 years. And that's the theme of the first part of the book. First you see, we get the sense from insurance that nobody's paying. And of course, if nobody's paying, then the providers say, well, we've always charged $100, but why don't we charge $200 or $2,000? And I think the ultimate rule of our market, if you think that nobody's paying, is prices will rise to whatever the market will bear. And until there's some force that works against that, we're going to continue this upward inflationary spiral, I think. And that's a bad, that you just can't support that. I speak to families who are now spending 20-30% of their household income on insurance and a little bit of health care. Yeah. And so when people say, taxes are too high elsewhere. Well, elsewhere you're charged maybe 8% and you get all your health care for free. We're spending 20-30% and we're still paying. So that to me is a really bad deal.
Yeah. I had we did our show from Denmark a couple of years ago, and I had one of the leader of the conservatives in Parliament. And he said, I understand people can actually go bankrupt in America from getting sick. And I was like, yes. And he says, that's crazy. As a conservative, that's crazy. Anyhow, we've got to have this conversation. Elizabeth Rosenthal, she's the author of the new book, An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. I think we need to keep talking about this.
Amen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Tom. Hey, I wanted to talk about where we go now. A lot of people are upset. They're, they're disappointed. They're angry. And so what we do now is we get people on the ballot. Here in Alabama, we have to find somebody who is ethical and understands integrity and get them ready to run and get the petitions and the fees paid by September. People need to look at their states and see what the day is to get people, what the deadline is to get someone on the ballot in 2018.
Yeah, I love this about you, Norma. You are so practical.
Well, if you can't get the work done, you can't get your dreams.
Yep.
And so you have to do your chores first.
You're right. As my mother would say, yes.
You do your chores first, then you go play. Well, also, the biggest chore for this country is to watch the House. You can do this by watching C-SPAN. If you're not at home, you can use your DVR or whatever system you have to tape what they did. You have to learn how to pull up the calendar for the House and for the Senate and watch these bills that they bring up. And if you don't like them and you say, no, you can't do that to me, you can't do that to my neighbors, to my country, you have got to use your voice, your freedom of speech, and start calling, emailing, write letters, and if necessary, kick their doors in. And
well,
go in
metaphorically,
and say, don't
yes.
do this to me. You've got to watch the calendar for the Senate. If the people here in the United States do not learn to watch our government and monitor their activities and their philosophies, we are going down the tubes. We won't have a country. Because if whatever these people think they can do in their own little rich world, it does not have a good outcome for those of us who struggle every day. We need, people talk about $15 an hour. That's not enough. For a man to buy a house, he's got to have $20 an hour because I'm surrounded by this corporation that's buying up all the houses and turning them into rentals. Mm-hmm. The day's coming when the regular American guy will not be able to buy a house for his family.
Oh, it's pretty much already there.
Yes. And so we have to reverse this by making sure our people earn enough money to become homeowners again and be able to buy our property back. We have to have single payer. I've been trying hard, very hard, to teach people that you pay 6.2% contribution into Medicare every payday, and your boss matches it.
I think it's less than that, isn't it? Isn't it like 1.45%, but you pay it on all of your income?
It's 6.2% out of every paycheck.
That's Social Security, isn't it? That's FICA?
Maybe so. But anyway, everybody pays into Medicare, and they can't use it. Even if they doubled whatever it is, and they could use it and expand it to cover dental and vision, we would have a healthier population. Yep. We cannot risk a sick population. We've had people dying here because there's no health care, and they're walking around with live active TB, and they're dying from it. Yeah. Do you want someone plunking your salad in front of you that has TB?
Right. Well, apparently the Republican governors who refuse to expand Medicaid do, and who refuse to allow paid sick time in their workplaces. Norma, excellent points all. Thank you for the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Ed in Seattle. Oh, click the right button here. Hey, Eric in Seattle. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I've been a listener for a while now, about a year, but this is my first time calling in, so I'm really excited.
Well, thank you.
I just wanted to ask about the conversation with Ms. Rosenthal earlier about healthcare costs, and it started off with a talk about doctors' compensation. And in my opinion, and I know you talk about this a lot on the show, doctors' compensation seems to pale in comparison to all these other administrative costs, especially with insurance costs being the most important one, since we could probably eliminate those almost altogether if we went to a national healthcare system.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that up about. And
I think you're absolutely right, Eric. But that said, there are a number of physicians in this country who are, and in fact, this is one of the big problems that we have right now, who are going into specialties simply because they can make more money there. So, we have a surplus. I'm not sure if we have a surplus, but we have a lot of plastic surgeons and a lot of cardiologists, and we actually have a shortage of GP docs. And so you've got situations where, for example, we met a physician down in Costa Rica who had gone to medical school in Vermont. And in Vermont, they've got this deal where if you go to the University of Vermont Medical School and get your MD, and whatever your loans are, it's going to cost a couple $100,000, that if you work for, I think it's 4 years in an underserved area, and this person, I believe, was working on in a Native American reservation, an Indian reservation, then the state pays off your loan. But this is like to try to encourage people to become GPs, because you don't make as much money as a general practitioner as you do as a plastic surgeon or a cardiologist. And so there's all these distortions, but also with those distortions, they're kind of reflective of a larger system, and the larger system is also reflecting back down into them. It's kind of a micro, macro, meta thing. That was my point, anyway.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be great to kind of trim the fat from, if we could trim some of the fat from the hospital administration costs, and all the insurance billing costs. I mean, if we could institute a national healthcare system, we would immediately trim a bunch of fat from hospital administration that deals with billing, and eliminate all the other fat from the insurance companies. That would leave a lot of money left over to simply compensate our general practitioners better. And I sort of don't buy the idea that, I'm sure there are some doctors that are going into it, just for the money. There might be some, but the vast majority, with all you have to go through being a doctor and working long hours and stuff, I know that most people are motivated, I'm sure, by altruism. So giving them the opportunity to just get
I think so too, Eric. And thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls on whatever you'd like to discuss right after this. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. And today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is Chapter 11. It's titled Corporate Control of Politics, page 170. During the bruising primary election season of 2008, a right-wing group put together a 90-minute hit job on Hillary Clinton and wanted to run it on TV stations in strategic states. Federal Election Commission ruled that the advertisements for the documentary were actually campaign ads and thus fell under the restrictions on campaign spending of the McCain-Feingold Act and thus stopped them from airing. Corporate contributions to campaigns have been repeatedly banned and in various ways since 1907, when Republican President Teddy Roosevelt pushed through the Tillman Act.
Citizens United, the right-wing group, sued to the Supreme Court with right-wing hitman and former Reagan Solicitor General Ted Olson, the man who argued Bush's side of Bush v. Gore, as their lead lawyer. This new case, Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, presented the best opportunity for the Roberts Court to use its 5-vote majority to completely rewrite the face of American politics, rolling us back to the pre-1907 era of the robber barons. And if there was one man to do it, it was John Roberts. Although he was handsome with a nice smile and photogenic young children, Roberts was no friend to average working Americans. If anything, he was the most radical judicial activist appointed to the court in more than a century. He'd worked most of his life in the interest of the rich and powerful and was chomping at the bit for a chance to turn more of America over to his friends. As Jeffrey Toobin wrote in The New Yorker, quote, "In every major case since he became the nation's 17th Chief Justice, Roberts has sided with the prosecution over the defendant, the state over the condemned, the executive branch over the legislative, and the corporate defendant over the individual plaintiff. Even more than Scalia, who has embodied judicial conservatism during a generation of service on the Supreme Court, Roberts has served the interests and reflected the values of the contemporary Republican Party." End of quote. And the fastest way the modern Republican Party could recover its power over the next decade was to immediately clear away all impediments to unrestrained corporate participation in electoral politics. If a corporation likes a politician, it can ensure that he is elected every time. If it becomes upset with a politician, it can carpet bomb her district and with a few $1 million worth of ads and politically destroy her. In the Citizens United case, the Roberts courts listened to arguments and took briefs and even discussed it among themselves as if they were going to make a decision. But instead of deciding the case on the relatively narrow grounds on which it had originally been argued, whether a single part of a single piece of legislation, in this case McCain-Feingold, was unconstitutional, the court asked for it to be re-argued in September 2009 and asked that the breadth of the arguments be expanded to re-examine the rationales for Congress to have any power to regulate so-called free speech by corporations. In this, they were going along with a request from Theodore B. Olson, who argued Bush v. Gore and would not just look at this narrow case, but go back nearly 20 years to re-examine and perhaps overturn their own ruling in the Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce case, where the court held that it was constitutional for Congress to pass limits on corporate political activities, as well as its decision in 2003 to uphold McCain-Feingold as constitutional. The setup for this 2010 decision came in June of 2007 in the Federal Election Commission versus Wisconsin Right to Life case, in which the Robert courts ruled that the FCC could not prevent Wisconsin Right to Life from running ads just because it was a corporation. The idea of Congress passing laws that limited corporate free speech was clearly horrifying to both Roberts and Scalia. Scalia went after the 1990 Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce case, in which the then Rehnquist court had ruled that the Michigan Chamber of Commerce was limited in its free speech in a political campaign because it was a corporation. Scalia complained this Austin was the only pre-McConnell case that this court had ever permitted the government to restrict political speech based on the corporate identity of the speaker. Austin upheld state restrictions on corporate independent expenditures, and God forbid the statute had been modeled after the federal statute that BCRA 203 amended. End of quote. The Austin case, Scalia concluded, with 4 others nodding, was a significant departure from ancient First Amendment principles. In my view, it was wrongly decided. Scalia was quoted at length from opinions in the Grosjean v. American Press 1936 case. In Scalia's words, quote, holding that corporations are guaranteed the freedom of speech and of press, safeguarded by the due process of law clause of the 14th Amendment. He also quoted the 1986 Pacific Gas and Electric Company versus Public Utility Commission of California case. The identity of the speaker is not decisive in determining whether speech is protected. Corporations and other associations, like individuals, contribute to the discussion, debate, and the dissemination of information and ideas that the First Amendment seeks to foster. The bottom line for Scalia was, quote, the principle that such advocacy is at the heart of the First Amendment's protection and is indispensable to decision-making in a democracy is no less true because the speech comes from a corporation rather than an individual.
The book, Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I think we finally figured out how to get our video to play and be able to hear it. Mercury's retrograde, you know, and it started the first week of April, and it pretty much runs through the end of the month. But we have prevailed. Well, we'll find out if we prevail. So anyhow, I got this email from Donald Trump. Thomas, I recorded a message for you on the high-stakes race in Georgia happening right now, and it is literally people are voting in Georgia right now, or at least in where I used to live, the congressional district I used to live in, Newt's old district in the northern suburbs of Atlanta, Marietta, and that neighborhood. And so here's what Donald Trump sent me in the mail this morning.
Hello, this is President Donald Trump. Liberal Democrats from outside of Georgia are spending millions and millions of dollars trying to take your Republican congressional seat away from you. Don't let them do it. Only you can stop the super liberal Democrats and Nancy Pelosi's group. Thank you. I appreciate it. Hello.
Oh, those super liberal Democrats. Oh, my God. And only you can stop them. And when you click on it, you get through right to where you can donate money to Donald Trump. Isn't that cool? The Georgia Grassroots Victory Fund, yes. Oh, my. Carol in Langley, Washington. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Well, you know what really irritates me is, they say the corporate media says, excuse me, the corporate media says that Donald Trump's approval numbers go up. Isn't he wonderful when he drops a bomb? Right. But they don't report on the millions of people that are just utterly disgusted with the militarism that never gets reported. And how do we get them? How do we get them to report this, or do we just give up?
You would have to go back to the Fairness Doctrine, which said that that in order to maintain a broadcast license, radio and television stations have to program in the public interest, which means that their news has to actually be news as opposed to infotainment. Right now, you've got a situation where not only are fortunes made, like the Iraq War, not only made CNN a fortune, but it also made the careers of Wolf Blitzer and Christiane Amanpour, or at least Wolf Blitzer for sure. And so right now you've got a situation where, and that's why, when the Iraq War started, Bill Maher got fired off ABC, and well, actually it was just before that. It was right after 9/11. And just before the Iraq War started, Phil Donahue got fired from MSNBC because he was arguing against going to war. We can't have that. War is good for business. So right now we've got a situation where war is good for the business of news because news has become a business. Pre-87, when the Fairness Doctrine was in place from 1924 to 1987, news could not be a business. News had to be the part of the broadcasting operation that operated behind a firewall separate from the business side and from the profit side in order to maintain the broadcast license. And basically it was the cost of the license. And so the news that we got was, it wasn't perfect by any means, but it was far more filled with news than last night we got home, Louise and I got home from Costa Rica, and we turned on the TV, and the two cable networks, CNN and MSNBC, they were both for like 15 minutes. We're going on and on about Donald Trump's tax returns. Well, it's an interesting story, but 15 minutes, with three experts, and let's have a conversation. At the same time that there's like this major there's 500,000 children starving to death right now in Somalia. You've got a civil war going on in South Sudan. You've got, Syria melting down. You got Libya falling apart. You've got here in the United States, we've got, a healthcare crisis that's ongoing. We've got an education crisis. You got Betsy DeVos saying we need to go back to teaching values to kids, which is code for we need to punish kids more severely and jack up the prison to pipeline or the school to prison pipeline, so that her brother, maybe Eric Prince, will come back to the United States and open a series of private prisons or something. God only knows. But we're not talking about the things that are actually going on. We're talking about the things that are safe, that don't offend advertisers, corporate advertisers, that don't offend the politicians that they need to suck up to get them to come on their programs, because otherwise they don't have a show, in quotes. So we would have to, and probably would also have to, break up a lot of the media ownership. These are structural problems, Carol. And they're structural problems that came about as a result of this whole idea of deregulation and the so-called free market that became ascendant during the Reagan administration and still has not been seriously rebutted by any national American politician of any repute other than arguably Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And that's where we need to go on this. And Bernie's really good on the media, by the way. He gets this stuff. Carol, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Craig in Encinitas, California. Hey, Craig, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Just glad to talk to you. I've been trying to get through for seems like years. But anyway, with these poll numbers that show the American people are not in favor of anything these Republicans want to do.
Right.
And it's killing me. It's been killing me for years. And I try to talk sense into relatives. Oh, but you got to cut taxes on the rich. I go, don't you guys get it? You're union members. They do not care about what you're going to get.
Right.
They want to cut your wage and cut your representation. Throw people in jail for marijuana. Increase the corporation prison. And it's just, man, I just had a rant, but I love talking to you.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have been on the show.
Okay. It was a great rant, Craig. Thanks a lot for the call. It was a really great rant. Archie in Salem, West Virginia. Hey, Archie, what's on your mind today?
Okay. You do understand that healthcare is not a right.
I understand that in the United States, by law, healthcare is not a right, although...
No, healthcare is not a right anywhere. God gives rights, not government.
Oh, Archie, are you really going to try that argument on me?
Well, it's the
Who's God? Whose God gives those rights?
There is only one God.
Okay, and his name is Allah, right?
No, his name is Jesus Christ.
Okay. Archie, thanks a lot for the call. John in Chicago. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, wow, that's a great call to follow on. Hey, Tom, my wife and I lived in Wisconsin. She was a senior accounting manager at Blue Cross Blue Shield United of Wisconsin. Her job, wonky accounting, was to come up with the cost analysis capitation rate for processing claims to maintain the contract they had with Medicare. My point is, insurance companies do quite well, charging per claim like $385. I think she said last time we talked about it, and they're not exactly going broke. And that's the thing. That's the role insurance companies can play in a single payer system where they bid competitively on processing individual claims for a whole state.
Right.
And then in turn, they're also held accountable for accuracy. They get audited for that. They got to have their costs down, and they're trying to be competitive. And
right.
That's
Plus,
the reason Medicare is so efficient.
Yeah, and plus, like in most countries that have single-payer health care, the health insurance companies can also offer premium programs for wealthy people. If you check into a hospital and you want your own suite, if you want your organic food catered to you, if you're out of the country, you want to be flown in a private jet, you can buy that kind of health insurance in a lot of other countries, and probably you can here. I don't know. I've never looked for it, but
I just want to comment to that. Where she used to work, there was a sea of office cubicles, people working and processing claims. A lot of jobs in that. Maybe it's not great jobs, but it's still a good office job for sure.
Sure.
And it was something that, it's not like these insurance companies got a full tent. No, they'll adapt to it and get into the business of bidding on government contracts to process claims.
Yeah, I'm with you. John, well said. Thank you. Stacy in Flossmoor, Illinois. Hey, Stacy, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
I wanted to ask you, I remember listening to you about a year or so ago, and you talked about Ronald Reagan was the one who put into law about the news media being able to report kind of infotainment, if you will, and they don't have to...
He stopped enforcing it was an FCC rule called the Fairness Doctrine, which came out of I think the 1924 Telecommunications Act, and he stopped enforcing it. It stayed on the books up until about a year and a half, 2 years ago, but nobody enforced it.
I was wondering, I'm like, well, if, how the Republicans are trying to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, I was wondering is it possible that could be repealed and replaced where they could no longer, just feed the public, junk.
Yeah, the problem, Stacey, is that, as Jimmy Carter pointed out on this program, we are, to the extent that we're a democracy, it's hanging on by a thread. We're mostly an oligarchy. We've got these very large corporations that control, not only our politicians, which is why our politicians vote and behave in ways that are favorable to these big corporations and the billionaires who own them, but also control the information we get. And so without, a broad and informed populace, as Thomas Jefferson pointed out, you can't have a functioning democracy. And I would argue that we don't. We have a functioning oligarchy. And so it's going to take some sort of major shock to the system. The last time we had a major shock to the system that rebooted things was 1929, the Great Crash. Stacey, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Sid in San Antonio. Hey, Sid, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just was thinking about what can we do about Congress and the way that they could, the whole bureaucracy of changing rules, where he changed the rule where President Obama's candidate didn't get a hearing. That's some serious power.
Yeah. So what's the question?
The question is, maybe I just don't understand how Congress works.
Okay. Well, here it is. The Constitution says that the House and the Senate separately, but each one shall make the rules by which they conduct themselves. So every 2 years, when a new Congress, in quotes, is sworn in and Congress reboots itself, essentially, every 2 years, both the House and the Senate vote on a set of rules for their conduct. Now, those rules can be changed with a majority vote, but it's very, very rare that that's ever done. But that's what Mitch McConnell did a couple of weeks ago when he did away with the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees. Excuse me. And this is just, it's following the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't provide for those rules. It basically says, these are self-regulating bodies. And so they've organized themselves and they regulate themselves in ways that, by and large, maintain and strengthen their own power. And the party in power, the party that controls the body, is typically the party that has, but not just typically, I can't think of an exception. In fact, I'd say always the party that defines what the rules are. So, whether or not there's a filibuster, whether it takes 60 votes or 65 votes or 66 votes, at one point it was 66 votes, to break a filibuster, whether bills will be brought to the floor of the House of Representatives through things like a discharge petition, which allows you to go around the Speaker of the House, or not. These are all, none of these things were made as laws or were made or written into the Constitution or even defined, or many of these ideas were not even developed by the founders. They're simply rules that Congress has come up with over the years to allow it to function, in whatever way it wants to. Does that make sense, Sid?
Around the people.
Yeah, exactly. Get around the people. Yeah, absolutely. And so, right now we have Republicans running both the House and Senate, so we got Republican rules. It's just that simple. Sid, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Dave in Moundsville, West Virginia. Hey, Dave, we got a minute to the break. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Back in the 60s in high school and college, we talked about the population explosion and the inherent problems that are going to grow out of that population.
Oh, yeah. Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb.
Now we're being encouraged to increase the population. When you were talking about, things that are being done in agriculture that really aren't sustainable, I happen to be a farmer and a conservation district supervisor, and we are really trying to do things to try to take care of the the water and soil resources to be able to grow that food. And there are things that some agriculture is using excuses for some of the monoculture, I think, and some I think it's mostly profit motivated more than just being able to produce enough food to feed everybody. But if we had more can control our population a little bit, a lot of these problems would go away. The Earth is a closed system. We have a limited number of resources, and if we use things up, how are we going to replace them?
Right, and we have to start viewing it as a closed system because for a long, long time, human beings were always able to despoil one area and then move on to another. Well, we can't move on to another planet. We've reached the point where we've saturated the world. Well said, Dave. Thank you very much for the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Art in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Art, what's on your mind today?
How you doing,
Good.
Mr. Hartmann? I got a question about the DNC and the guy in Kansas. What was the deal with them not providing me with funds to put out flyers?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to it. The official reason that the DNC gives, or at least is said by, I'm not sure that the DNC has ever made an official statement, but what I've heard Democrats say is we didn't figure there was any way we were going to win this election. This is Charles Koch's district, not a chance, so we're not going to waste our resources. And 2 days before the election, or 3 days before the election, they decided to pay for 25,000 get-out-the-vote calls, but that was pretty much it. The less charitable explanation is that Mr. Thompson, the guy who was running in Kansas, was essentially a Bernie-crat, was a progressive Democrat, and that the party institutionally is less kind to Bernie-crats than to the more, quote, middle-of-the-road or centrist Democrats. I'm not sure I buy that. I mean, literally this week, Tom Perez, who runs the DNC, and Bernie Sanders are doing a tour of 7 states together, the two of them. So, the conspiracy theory part of it, I'm just, like I said, I'm very skeptical about. But I think that this idea of not fighting races you can't win is stupid. It's you have to look at this like war, and I hate war metaphors in general. But the fact of the matter is that you may have 30 battles that you have to fight in order to win the war, but you don't have to win all 30 of them. You have to maybe win 20 of them, or 16 of them, or 17 of them. But you still fight every single one of those battles. And we have to be doing that, politically. We've got to go back to a 50-state strategy, to a state house strategy, to a county level strategy, and be contesting absolutely everything. Art, thanks for the call. Elton in Lima, Ohio. Hey, Elton, what's up?
Well, as you know, I listen to a lot of the radio when I'm driving, and it's been frustrating the last 3 or 4 days. I've listened to what that blurb you played from Trump probably a dozen or more times, and have yet to hear what the Democrats' response to that has been. It feels like everybody's giving Trump all the free publicity. I'm sure he's not paying you to play it, but none of us are hearing the response or a counter to it.
Yeah. Well, the response obviously is this is what the Republicans are up to, and therefore we need to show up. The reason why I played it was my hope that it would energize Democrats to say, hey, wait a minute, if the president is out there, cranking up the fundraising machine and trying to get people out to vote, then we damn well better too. And whether that's why other media is playing it or not, I have no idea. And I didn't know that it was all over the place. I thought I had something kind of cool, or unique, or whatever. But that's why I played it, Elton. Thanks a lot for the call. Dave in Northampton, Mass. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, always a pleasure, Tom. These ignorant, arrogant Republican conservatives, you'd think that the way they're dismantling healthcare, they'd want to keep some of us healthy to fight their wars.
You would think, yeah. Excuse me.
The Southern slave owner knew back in the Deep South that you didn't beat the slave half to death. He's not going to be able to work the field. That's how greedy these guys are now.
Yeah. It really it's not probably the most perfect metaphor, but your point is well taken, Dave. Thanks a lot for the call. Katie in West Bloomfield, Michigan. Hey, Katie, what's up?
Hey, Tom, welcome back.
Thank you.
I don't often disagree with you. Matter of fact, it's rather rare. But I want I want the news media to keep harping on and keep pounding on Trump's tax returns.
Oh, so do I.
I think that that's the biggest ball that we have to keep following, because if we start bouncing away from that ball, we can't trust anything that he proposes. We can't trust anybody that he sees in the White House. We can't trust any Easter egg or what's in it. So I think we can't trust him until we can see his tax returns. I don't believe anything he says about education. I don't believe anything he says about Social Security. I don't believe anything he says about the Interior Department or any of the other departments.
But see, those are all stories that should be being discussed, Katie. My point was not to minimize the story about Trump not putting his tax returns out. I think it's a scandal. But there are all these other things that are happening just inside the Trump administration. Look at the conflicts of interest, with Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, or look at the conflict, the bizarre stuff Betsy DeVos is up to. Look at how corruptible, anyway, if not corrupted, Rex Tillerson is. These stories are not being told because what our news media is doing is long form on easy stuff, rather than doing the hard work of assigning reporters to look into these individual stories, which I think are just as destructive, frankly, to the Trump administration. And that was my call, was for, more comprehensive news. I want to know more about what's going on in the world, not spend 15 minutes listening to two Democrats and a Republican arguing over whether America cares about the tax returns, which is what I saw on TV last night. But Katie, I get your point, and I don't disagree with it. Thanks for the call. Bill in Prairie Lee, Texas. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hello?
Hey, you're on the air, Bill.
Hey, Tom. Your caller from West Virginia earlier said that Jesus was God. Well, Jesus isn't God. Jesus is the Son of God. And I get tired of these people taking my Christianity and twisting it for their own use.
Well, and not only that, go read Matthew 25. Jesus was a big believer in healthcare being a right. Right? Literally, if you want to get into heaven, you have to heal the sick. He just came right out and said it.
Oh, that's what I was just going to do. I was going to reference that. Exactly. He needs to read chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew, starting with verse 31.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was raised in a minister's house, so.
Yeah, this is not rocket science, Bill. This is, and this is Christianity 101. Heal the sick, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, which today's equivalent would be, house the homeless, visit those in prison, and there's probably something I'm missing. Give drink to the thirsty or something, and the disciples were all freaked out when he said these are the rules to get into heaven, because they said, well, we've never seen you sick. How can we get into heaven if we've never healed you? And he's like, as you have done unto the least of these, your brethren, you've done unto me. And that, it's the great commission, the great challenge, the great work that Christians have to do. Bill, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. And thanks so much for being with us today. Lord willing, the creek don't rise and my lungs are holding out. I'll be back tomorrow. And in the meantime, if you're in Georgia, if you're, in the district that is voting, be sure to get out to vote. If you know anybody who lives in Georgia, tell them, give them a call and make something happen down there. It'll be a real interesting day. Because democracy is not a spectator sport. It actually does require all of us. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates. helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.